That's right. In all of the uncertainty of the evening, there is a little patch of certainty in the seat of Barton, and some very happy faces there. Linda Burney right in the centre. She's in Bardwell Park. Welcome to the broadcast, and congratulations on winning the seat of Barton, Linda Burney.
Thank you so much. Around me tonight we have the people that made this victory possible in Barton. My candidacy was announced some 2 months ago, and we have worked assiduously for that 2 months in a good old-fashioned Labor Party campaign. And these people around me are the people that made it happen. This is not my victory alone. This is a victory for the seat of Barton, and I cannot be more grateful to the volunteers, to these gorgeous young people around me. It's just been extraordinary 8 weeks, and Labor is back where it belongs, in the heart of Barton, made possible by my volunteers and everyone that worked together.
Linda, there's been heaps of changes in Barton, obviously a major redistribution which has changed the look and feel of the electorate. Your candidacy was announced a couple of months ago. Right up until the last minute you weren't sure whether the incumbent was actually going to contest the seat. Nicholas Varvaris seemed to be not sure about whether he was going to recontest it until the very last available day. Did that instability work for you, do you think?
I think that the fact that Mr Varvaris nominated after the close of nominations for the Liberal Party really put a doubt into the mind of people in Barton about his commitment and about whether he was serious about being the next member for Barton. But we did not cast our campaign around Nicholas Varvaris. We cast our campaign around what the values of Labor are, what this seat is about. This is an extraordinary seat. It's made up of people from so many cultures, from so many faith groups, and people that know what Labor stands for. They weren't going to put up with changes to Medicare, and they didn't want to lose $28 million from the schools in Barton. And tonight, together, we have created history in this seat. Not only am I the first woman to represent Barton, I'm the first Aboriginal woman into the House of Representatives. All of our victory in this seat, and for the forest.
You've had a lot of firsts in. You've had a lot of firsts in your life, Linda Burney, and you're a recent deputy leader of the Labor Party at a state level. You know how difficult it is to lead a party in opposition. What's your assessment of the job that Bill Shorten's done over the last 3 years?
I think Bill Shorten has done an extraordinary job. Look at this campaign. Whatever the outcome is tonight, and it's close, I think there is no way that you could not say that Labor has won this campaign. And looking at the figures as I'm trying to keep up with them tonight, it is still incredibly close. But what I do know is there is a sea of red across the inner west and the west and southwestern suburbs of Sydney, and Barton's in the middle of that sea of red. We have state members like Steve Camper, Chris Minns. We have extraordinary people at the local government level like Bill Savranovsky. We have all of these people around us, and we are going to make changes in Barton. Barton is for Labor, and Labor will serve the people of Barton as they have served me and made me feel extraordinarily humble in our pursuit for bringing Barton back to Labor, and that's what we've done.
Well, congratulations on your historic win, and thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. All the very best, and it's an interesting night, and Labor has done an extraordinary job, and thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah!
Certainly is an interesting night. As Linda Burney said, you know, she views that Labor has won the campaign. That doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that you win the election. People often, Chris, talk about defining moments of campaigns. What do you look at it that way?
Hang on a sec. How does that work, by the way? How do you win a campaign and lose an election?
Well, because they've closed the gap so substantially.
No, I actually agree with Mark Latham on this one. If you win the election, then you've won the campaign, because, you know, at every election, everyone turns up, and they all vote again, and they decide who they want to be the government.
Are you really saying
and
you guys have run the best campaign?
And well, if we form a government, Lee, then we have won the election and we have won the campaign.
Maybe you just had a pretty good buffer to start with.
Just dropping the bar now. We're lowering the bar, I think.
Well, look, it is one of the concessions that if an opposition stays in opposition, they try and spin out there and they says, well, we actually won the campaign, but we actually didn't win government. I mean, the Sharks won tonight, which is great news. But if they hadn't won tonight, they couldn't say, well, look, we won the game on the ground, but we didn't win it on the scoreboard.
Hang on, I remember the coalition saying this in 2010.
Yeah.
But given where we stand now...
Well, there was no outcome in 2010.
What's your take on this, Chris?
Well, given where we stand now, because if it continued along this pattern, then at least governing would be extremely difficult. One thing that we could say for absolutely certain now is that a joint sitting of both houses would not pass the ABCC bill, and it would not pass the other government bill that was the purpose of having the double dissolution election in the first place. So the Prime Minister would return to Parliament in quite a weakened position.
Well, it would be regrettable if we're unable to pass those bills. They remain bills that we would continue to seek to prosecute. But again, where we are tonight, and with a lot of counting still to go, the prospect of a Labor majority government does not exist.
Excuse me to interrupt, Scott Morrison. I'm sorry. We're just going to go to some live pictures now.
And at some point I can respond to some of this, right?
Yes, come back. Richard Di Natale's talking right now to Greens.
Just putting the marker down.
A party that's going to stand up for strong action on climate change to save the reef. A party that understands that if we do that, we can create jobs in the renewable energy economy. A party that understands that no matter how difficult the problem, the answer can never be to lock up young kids and families in those hellholes offshore. A party that understands that to be able to offer people protection, that's a sign of strength, not weakness. A party that understands that we've got a problem in this country with growing inequality, where the gap between the rich and everybody else is growing, and we need to do something about it. And right around the country, people are listening. We've seen big swings to the Greens in so many seats in this election. In the Senate, it's too early to tell, but we do know that we are now in the running for a second senator in Queensland. And I know that Janet Rice will be joining me and return our 2 Victorian Green senators. Now, in the House of Reps, what we know now is that when people elect a Greens member to the Parliament, they like it and they want them back, and that's why Adam Bandt's been elected. Let me also tell you about some of the extraordinary results that we've achieved here in Victoria in the lower house. We have seen swings of 10% to the Greens. In Higgins, in Wills, in Batman, and in Melbourne Ports, where it's a three-way contest. Let me just tell you, now I've been through a few of these close results. I've had to sit it out for a few nights. We have 2 seats now that are on a knife edge. In Batman, Sorry, Alex, but you're not going to be getting much sleep over the next few nights. So, Batman is absolutely line ball on a knife edge. We won't know tonight. In Melbourne Ports, where it's a three-way contest, we don't know the outcome yet, but let me tell you something. At the moment, we're in a battle with the Labor Party. And if we get over the Labor Party, it's currently line ball, we're a chance of knocking off the Liberals, who are now currently in a position to win that seat. The decisive factor there will be whether Labor's Michael Danby and his preferences, which are going to the Liberal Party, will elect a Liberal member. And let me tell you, we're hearing it's going to be a very close election. And I just say to the people of Melbourne Ports, be careful, because your member may have delivered government to the coalition. So we're on a knife edge in both of those seats, in Melbourne Ports and in Batman. In Higgins and Wills, extraordinary campaigns, huge swings coming from a long way back. And can I say, as I said when I took on the leadership,
Natali, that's the Greens leader Richard Di Natale there speaking to some of his assembled troops. Chris, that was a remarkably ebullient speech for somebody who currently has one seat.
One seat and may lose one senator in South Australia. So we have to go back to what happened at the last election. And in fact, the Green Party vote went down at the last election. It has recovered to around about 10% of the vote, which seems to be a point at which the Greens do sort of sit on a national scale. What he has done is collapsed a lot of gaps around the country, and I think Richard Di Natale has a long-term plan of essentially trying to stake out all the ground around about 10 k's out from the GPO in every capital city, but mostly taking Labor Party seats in the first instance, threatening, we know, seats like Higgins, but nowhere near enough at the moment to make a distance.
Just before you move into crunching down all those various seats, can I just bring in Barry for a second? Barry, how are you rating the Greens' performance tonight?
Well, it's not a lot has changed until we see what's going on in the Senate. They're not guaranteed any extra gains, but of course, I think what they've done in this election is laid down the groundwork for the next one. They're really starting to spook the major parties, and not this time just Labor, but the Liberal Party, of course, in Higgins. So yeah, they could. I think they've done well.
And Barry, before I go back to Chris and Anthony to get them to crunch down some of those individual seats, just big picture, Anthony said before that he doesn't think we're going to be able to call a result on this election tonight. Is that your reading of it as well?
Yeah, I've been saying that for a while. The Labor Party is now claiming to have locked in 10 seats ahead in 6 others, though I would warn a couple of those are very tight in Queensland, 4 long shots in New South Wales. But so then you move to Western Australia, and the word out of the West is that Labor will win Burt, the Liberals will win Hasluck, and Cowan is a line ball. And just before I go, can I just make one point? And I'm getting lots of text messages here in Victoria to say we should straighten something else out. We might have overestimated the impact of the CFA dispute for this reason. In Bendigo and McEwen, the 2 seats where both the Liberal Party and the CFA campaigned very hard, there have been swings to the Labor Party, and in Latrobe, likewise, a 3% swing to Labor, even though they needed 4 to win, but a 3% swing. So the argument coming out of the Victorian government, I can assure you, is that in the end, apart from perhaps Corangamite, the CFA wasn't a big deal after all.
Barry, just before you go, I wanted to ask you about one thing. Scott Morrison was talking before about the potential impact of pre-poll votes and saying that could be favourable for the coalition. What's your reading of that?
It's very hard to say. How do we really know which way the pre-polls are going to go?
Well, he said traditionally they tend to favour the coalition.
Yeah, and I have heard that. It depends on at what point in the campaign people voted. I mean, the Medicare issue was big at one point, and then the government got Brexit, got a bit of wind in their sails behind Brexit. So I guess it depends on when they voted. Now, I noticed that Scott Morrison has already announced that Cronulla beat Parramatta. Well, Collingwood are in front of Carlton too.
It's lucky that we keep people up to date with the footy scores, because they might drift off somewhere else.
At least they're going to get a result tonight.
At least this game is close.
There was a result in Shark Park.
Collingwood have actually won more games on election day than any other club. They've won 6, and this could be 7.
Oh,
How stunningly surprising that you would know that stat.
I'm going to start talking about novels if you people keep talking about sport. Can you and Anthony please
so continuing on the Greens, and Barry and I essentially in furious agreement, is is that Richard Di Natale has a long-term plan, and so this is part of his long-term plan tonight, where he's making up ground on the Labor Party essentially, and on the Liberal Party in the long run, where they stake out their ground, around about 10 k's out from the GPO. So, Andy, let's look at how they've actually gone tonight in those seats where they were pushing fairly hard. And let's start in the seat of Graindler, where Anthony Albanese was defending his ground.
Yeah, and we've got a margin of 5.8%, which is our estimated Labor versus Green margin, and that's what the Commission have been counting tonight. But at this stage, the Greens are actually still in third place. Meow Ludo, meow meow. I had to say his name at some stage tonight. He's the Science Party candidate, lost his deposit, but best name at the election. But the Greens are in third place, so they're not going to figure in the preference distribution. And at this stage, then the Labor Party goes on to retain that. And the Commission will have to make a decision in the next couple of days about how to count that seat. But that's certainly Albanese has run a very strong campaign in that electorate, and in the end, the Greens look like they've fallen short in third again.
All right, so to the seat that they hold, and that is the seat of Melbourne. Adam Bant has had for a couple of elections now, and he continues to increase his margin.
I'll just throw in quickly there, the seat of Richmond on the north coast, they're distant in third,
okay,
and the Labor Party will hold it from second place. Adam Bant, yes, easily has been returned. He's got a margin of 5.3 versus Labor. We've got a Labor versus Labor versus Green preference count in this electorate. Labor's still only on about 25%, so that's roughly what they got last time. There's a 1.5% swing to the Greens on those numbers. So Adam Bant's been comfortably re-elected in Melbourne and remains the leader of the Greens in the lower house.
And then to the seat of Wills, and Peter Khalil here has extraordinary foreign policy. Batman, I'm sorry, we're going to Batman first, my apologies. And this is David Feeney, and this was where the Greens held out most hope.
Up against Alex Batal, who's, I think it's about the fifth time she's running this electorate. Now, you can see there, when you look at the percentages, is that the Labor Party's on 37.8. Now, the Liberal preferences are flowing to Labor, and so that means the Greens can't catch up in that electorate. There's a 9.5% swing. At this stage, Labor's ahead on 51.1. Looks like there might have been actually a bit more Liberal leakage than I expected. Unless there's something dramatic in the postals or absence, that looks like it's been held by the Labor Party.
But anyway, the margin now is very small for David Feeney, and a tough race next time around. So let's move on to the seat of Wills. As I was just saying, Peter Khalil got great foreign policy credentials. He's replacing retiring Kelvin Thompson.
And up against Samantha Ratnam from the Greens. On the first preferences there, you can say she's again in the second place. The Labor Party is a bit further ahead on first. It's only on 38.5, up against 31.9, 20.7 for the Liberals. We've got a preference count. There has been 11% swing, 11.7% swing, but Labor will retain that seat, and Peter Khalil will go into Parliament replacing Kelvin Thompson.
And to Melbourne Ports, where Michael Danby was fighting hard. And, sorry, we're going to Higgins now. I'm sorry. My apologies. To Higgins, Kelly O'Dwyer.
Kelly O'Dwyer up against Carl Cadder. And also for the Greens, Jason Ball. And as you can see there, Jason Ball is comfortably in second place. Now, just hold on this for the moment. The key thing here is that we've got a preference count Liberal-Labor. The key thing is the Liberal Party vote is 48.4. Yep. They won't lose from that position no matter who comes second. Now, we'll go on and show the swing in two-party terms. I think I turned off preference counts in that electorate, so it's done something else. I've rejected the preference count from the Electoral Commission and started to do my own estimate, and I've got the Liberals winning that easily. But as I said, 48% of the vote, that was easy.
And that was just simply a displacement between Labor and Greens, largely, and Kelly's won a great campaign. Well done to Kelly and Higgins. OK, now moving on to Melbourne Ports and Michael Danby, a right-wing warrior in Victoria.
Yes, and we'll go through the full graphics, but I'll look at the first preferences line here. Just stop and look at the percentages when they come up. The Liberals are on 40.3, Michael Danby's on 27.3, and the Greens on 25.8. I'm still not convinced that he will finish in second place. The change in first preference votes seems to indicate that might happen. Now, if he does still finish in second place, it comes out as Labor 51.3%, which is our projection. All I'm pointing out is if he doesn't get to second place, if he loses second place, then Melbourne Ports comes back into play. I'm cautious on that. Now, it is an interesting electorate because it has an enormous Jewish population who don't vote on Saturday. A lot of them don't vote on Saturday, and therefore they vote pre-poll and they vote postal. Now, I think I've factored that into my modelling. But again, I'm just cautious enough to say I think there'll be a bit more digging around on that. And I'll just say one other thing about the pre-poll vote. Today, the pre-poll votes that were cast within divisions were counted. What's to come is pre-poll votes that were cast away from the electorate. So they're basically absent votes. What also hasn't been counted is absent votes which are outside of the electorate, and that will have an impact in certain electorates, because sometimes the absent vote matters depending where the boundary is. And the thing that hasn't been counted is the postal vote, and the Liberal Party has been much stronger on organising postal vote campaigns than Labor at recent elections, and that may, I mean, I know it's a cliche to say it'll go down to postals, but in modern voting trends that is actually important.
And in the olden days, it was only the Liberals that could travel. So postal votes, they said, always went with the Liberal Party.
So, Anthony, how long could it actually take to get the result?
Look, the
Dawning reality.
Let's just stay.
Okay, look,
Having so much fun.
the key thing, look, people always get very cranky that you don't know the results in a close electorate. In a close electorate, the Commission has to conduct the count in a manner which will withstand the court challenge.
Yeah, right.
So if it is unclear who has won, tomorrow they'll decide which electorates to vote resources to. The parties will decide which electorates to send their best scrutineers to. And they'll start to go through tonight's count bit by bit and check every single vote. All the votes we've got tonight have been counted by day labour, essentially, the people hired to do the count. Tomorrow and Monday, the scrutineers will be in looking at all those votes when they're recounted and saying, raising this error or that error. So there are minor corrections that would come with that and changes that come with that. Then there will be the additions of special hospitals tomorrow, which usually favour the Liberal Party. It's not a lot of numbers. And then next week they'll start to open all the ballot papers that are in envelopes. They come back as absence, they come back as postals, and that in a close electorate will be a long and tedious process, because the parties will check every name that's come in and they'll check it against their list of who they think's voted and stuff, and they'll maybe question a signature here or a date of birth on the form. That's how this process happens, and because it's a close contest, the count slows down in that process. And as I said, the other thing is, in a seat like Melbourne Port's there, where I'm saying I'm not sure who's got second and third, the key thing to remember there, the Commission has to ensure the count is done correctly on first preferences, and then its other legal obligation is to do the distribution of preferences properly. Tonight they do an indicative preference count, but that does not determine the winner. In a case like Melbourne Port's, if there is confusion over who finishes second, the indicative preference count becomes a bit...
Just mentioning that Barnaby Joyce has declared victory in New England.
Very good.
And can I just make this point about... I know Penny wanted to make some points about an early conversation, but this goes beyond the partisan side of this. I mean, tonight we've seen sadly a loss in Mayo, but picking up from a former independent seat in Fairfax. The Greens have not picked up any of the others. There's been none of the Nats have been able to hold on in Cowper and in New England. We're doing very well in Page, but that's a two-party contest. So. In withstanding a lot of those challenges that were coming from independents and Greens, Kelly's held on in Higgins, that incursion into the House of Representatives by the independents and Greens has not happened tonight, and it is falling to a two-party race on the balance of the seats that are being contested tonight. So not a big change when it comes to the independents in the House of Representatives or the Greens.
Thank you, Scott. Where are we going? I'm not sure. To Luke Gosling. Sorry. I know.
Yours,
Penny, we'll come back to you. Sorry, you're next off the rank.
Start writing this
You said that last time.
That's what she said last time, wasn't it? We had Anthony and
bias at work. The seat of Solomon in the Northern Territory, we crossed up there earlier. It's a marginal seat.
Well, for Luke, I'm happy to tap them out.
All right, very good.
There you go.
He is standing by, has been for a while, waiting for us to come to him. Just hold on a second, Luke Gosling. Chris and Anthony, just give us the lowdown.
Yeah, former Deputy Mayor, ALP's Luke Gosling, is also senior figure in the Army, senior officer in the Army.
Yes, Natasha Griggs is the former Deputy Mayor of Palmerston.
Oh, sorry.
Luke Gosling tried last time and was narrowly defeated. This time he's had no difficulty at all. Look, clearly Northern Territory politics is biting in the federal election campaign, because there's a big swing in Solomon, as we'll see on the next graphic. There's a big swing to the Labor Party, and there's a swing of about 8% next door in Lingiari, and they're some of the bigger, outside of Tasmania, they're the biggest swings we're seeing around the country. So clearly it'll be an interesting election in the Northern Territory in a couple of weeks, but for tonight, in terms of the election results tonight, Solomon, Luke Gosling has won that seat at his second attempt.
And as you remember, one of our first interviews tonight was with Natasha Griggs, who at that stage wasn't conceding defeat in Solomon, but I think she'd probably have to right about now. Standing by at the Darwin's Marara Pint Club, which seems like an appropriately sized beverage for a swing of this dimension, is the new member for Solomon, Luke Gosling. Luke Solomon, how do you explain this significant swing?
We fought a great campaign. We worked hard. I've been out there for literally years now, talking to people of Darwin and Palmerston about the issues that are important to us. And I think if it showed anything, the victory tonight showed that you've got to listen to people, and you've also got to do what you say. And I think what we've seen at both the territory and the federal level is promises not kept. And if there's one thing that you need to do as a federal politician when you're representing people, is you need to do what you say.
Okay, so
and
what
I'll
were the
do what I
significant
say.
broken promises
I'm really
in
proud
Solomon?
of.
What were the promises
Sorry, again?
What were the promises not kept in Solomon that had a significant impact on this campaign?
I think over a couple of campaigns we had some promises around housing. We also had some promises around a PET scanner for cancer patients. And these promises were over 6 years and they weren't fulfilled in government. There were other things as well, obviously, at the federal level where promises weren't kept. There were cuts to health, cuts to education, and when the biggest thing for people in Darwin and Palmerston in the electorate is the cost of living, the cost of housing, then I think what the people of Darwin and Palmerston have said is that we expect our federal representatives to stand up to do what they say.
Luke Gosling, the two-party preferred swing to you is around about 8.5%. But if you have a look at the primaries in this seat, there was a swing against Natasha Griggs of about 15%, but only one to you of about 2%. The rest of it all comes from a whole bunch of minor candidates who all picked up 2 or 3% here and there, and they kind of ended up finding their way back to you. It's not a great expression of confidence in Labor or you, is it?
Well, I think it's a great expression in confidence in myself and our team that all of those candidates who work very hard, and I take my hat off to everyone who put their hand up, gave me their confidence. So I'm proud that I've had people's confidence. It was a great feeling today out there, but people looked me in the eye and said, mate, we're backing you, don't let us down, and they can be assured that I won't. I just want to thank the people of Darwin and Palmerston who put their faith in me. I want to thank my campaign team. I want to thank Bill Shorten who come up here during the wet, during the dry, during the build-up. We are the northern capital of Australia, and it's about time that we had a strong voice in Canberra, and I'll be that voice.
Well, Luke Gosling, you are the 4th member for Solomon in 10 years. Congratulations on your result tonight, and it looks like you're in for a very merry evening.
Thanks, Annabelle.
We're going to go back to Sabra Lane now, who is at Labor Party headquarters in Melbourne. Sabra.
Hello, Lee, and with me at the headquarters is Kim Carr. The room here has been abuzz for most of the evening, and Kim Carr has joined us and he's been beaming since he's walked into the room here. What so far do you make of this result, Kim?
Oh, this is a stunning result for Labor and the Labor movement. This is a clear indication of what courage, what determination and what sticking to Labor values can produce. And clearly Bill Shorten has led a formidable campaign and produced an extraordinary result, which very few in the press gallery, I note, were able to foresee. Now, if we think back to where we were at the end of the last parliament and, of course, the election, and now we think back to what happened in October, where, of course, in a seat like Bass, the Labor Party polling was showing us about 40%. Tonight we're looking at a change in the member there. We look back to what we were at even in January of this year. This has been an extraordinary achievement for Bill Shorten, for the Labor movement, and because a recognition by the Australian people that there needs to be substantive change in the politics of this country.
Anthony Green has said that he thinks he won't be able to call this election tonight, that we won't know the result. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it's more than a reasonable proposition. I think the Labor Party is looking at gaining between 15 and 17 seats. It's quite clear the government is likely to lose its majority. majority, it's also quite clear that there'll be a hung parliament in that environment. As it seems to me now we'll start to enter into a new process of negotiation about what the future government of Australia is.
We've seen some interesting results tonight that weren't forecast by anyone. In Longman, Wyatt Roy losing there, Eden Monero, that had been talked about, Peter Hendy. What do you make of those losses?
Well, the Labor Party research showed that we are able to secure those sorts of results. I know there was considerable media speculation about what's likely to happen. I often wonder about what the source of those stories is likely to be, but it's in keeping with the research that we undertook, and we understood that there were likely to be substantial changes. Now, I think we've got a bit of help, frankly. It strikes me that we look at Eden Monero and we look at Longman. These are two people that were staunch supporters of Malcolm Turnbull. And I find it interesting that they're ones that have hit the fence tonight, or appear to be hitting the fence tonight. And it does seem to me there's quite substantial division within the Liberal Party, and I would expect that level of division will become more prominent now, as we note that Malcolm Turnbull, whose prime claim to fame was he was a great vote catcher. It's been demonstrated tonight that that's a fallacy.
The CFA issue, a lot of people thought that was going to be a big issue for Victoria. Do you think it has, because you haven't won the kind of seats that you were hoping to? Chisholm is...
Well, let's have a look at that. First of all, I don't think we're going to lose any seats in Victoria. I think we're winning Chisholm. We're ahead in Chisholm at the moment. And, of course, the biggest and probably the more poorest area in the area, the biggest in Oakley, is a pre-poll centre which has substantial numbers of votes cast prior to today. So I'm pretty confident that we'll hold that. We're also, I have some confidence that we'll be able to win seats in Victoria, in Latrobe and in Dunkley. We've had significant swings in Victoria above the national average. Now, even on your program, the 7:30 report, the claims being made about the effect in Jagga simply weren't borne out on the day. What we've got here is substantial swings to the Labor Party in those seats that were supposed to be affected by the CFA dispute. It was a state dispute. It's gone on for 3 years, gone on far too long, but it is a matter for the state government to resolve.
Now, if it turns out that there is a hung parliament, and we don't know that for sure, and Labor finds itself in opposition again, you've already said that Bill Shorten deserves a crack at leading the party for another 3 years. Do you think that will be the view of the entire...
Who could argue with that, given these results tonight? What we've seen here is an extraordinary display of courage being rewarded by the Australian people. And that's exactly why we've been able to secure the result, because he stood up for Labor values. He's been a very, very effective leader, and I'm looking forward to him being able to call himself Prime Minister of Australia if those discussions go well.
Senator Carr, thank you very much for talking.
We're having a look there at some photos of the Liberal Party function tonight at the Wentworth Hotel in Sydney. The faithful sort of loitering around, no doubt hoping to hear from Malcolm Turnbull at some point in the night. You are on the ABC. It has just gone 10 p.m. in the east, 10 p.m. in the east, 8 p.m. in the west. 63% of the vote has been counted, and we have a 2.9% swing to the Labor Party. The ABC's view is that the result of the election will not be able to be called this evening. We can give you a few more details, though, on what we know so far. Here is the man with the magic graphics, Michael Rowland.
They are very magic indeed. Thank you very much, Lee. Let's show our viewers now the state of the play in the 45th Parliament, and we see 73 seats held by the Coalition, the Labor Party clinging to 67 seats. That figure may rise, of course. The Greens, 1 seat, care of Adam Bant, being re-elected to the seat of Melbourne, and the crossbenchers 4 at this stage. So let's flick it over and see how the primary votes are shaping up as we just hit 10 o'clock in the evening, and we see the 41.9% figure for the Coalition, 34.8% to the Labor Party, 10.1% for the Greens, and 13.1% for the Independents. Let's see how that primary vote has moved over the course of the night with some even more magic graphics over here. Look at this. And we can see now the Liberal Party's primary vote down 0.3.5%, and the ALP up 1.4%, Greens up 1.6%, and Independents up about half a percent rather in primary vote terms. Let's extrapolate the primary vote out after the distribution of preferences, and there you see, as Lee just mentioned, that swing of 2.9% to the Labor Party. Let's look at some key seats in South Australia. Of course, the headline seat, the headline result has been Rebecca Sharkey of the Xenophon Party taking the seat of Mayo of Jamie Briggs. Let's look at some other seats now. The seat of Hindmarsh, held by Matt Williams, Liberal MP since 2013. He took this seat off the other guy you're seeing there, Steve Georgianis, the Labor Party candidate. And Steve Georgianis has got a swing of about 2.5%. And the ABC is predicting that Steve Georgianis is about to get his old job back. He, based on those figures, will be the new member for Hindmarsh. Let's look now at the seat of Sturt, held by Senior Coalition Minister Christopher Pyne. There was some doubt about that seat before that $50 billion submarine announcement. That looks as though that is one of the factors behind Christopher Pyne retaining that seat of Sturt, despite a 3.6% swing to Labor Party candidate Matt Loader. Let's finish off this swing through the South Australian seats with a look at Boothby, vacated at this election by long-serving MP Andrew Southcote. And there you see, despite a swing to the Labor candidate there, the new Liberal candidate, Nicole Flint, is about to be sworn in as the new Liberal MP for the seat of Boothby. That's the latest in South Australia. That's the latest nationally. Back to you, Lee, and the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Michael. Penny Wong, you've been wanting to make some points now for a good 25 minutes. Have you got any idea what they actually were?
Good on you, Steve Georgianis. That's obviously still going to be a very close seat, that one. We're ahead. Steve won that in 2004. We had to wait, I think, 2 weeks to get the result. Hopefully we won't have to.
He's a very patient guy, isn't he, that Steve Georgianis? He's done a lot of waiting.
That's you've seen a swing to us in some key seats in South Australia, which is really good. Also wanted to make a comment about the Greens, which was that, half an hour ago?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, obviously the Greens' tactics are as Chris said. You know, they want to take Labor seats. Let's be really clear. And so we spend resources fighting the Greens to hold seats like Anthony Albanese's, David Feeney's seat, and it's great to see that it's likely both of those will. Well, I think Anthony's home and ho, so that's great, and it's David Feeney likely to retain his seat, and that's also a great thing. But I did want to go back to Scott's comment about, you know, who's won the campaign, and well, we must have won the campaign if we win. I just would say there's only one side tonight that is already making excuses, and only one side tonight which is already lowering the bar about you know how you judge success, and that's the Coalition. I think Labor's had a great campaign. I think Bill's performed really extraordinarily well. Tanya's been great. I think Chris Bones done a great job. Anthony, Mark Butler, a whole range of people. I think the front bench has performed really well, and George Wright and all the staff at CHQ. I did want to say, I don't know that we did grey. Did we do grey when we went through the swing of the South Australian seats where we were at there? There was a reasonably significant swing against the incumbent, possibly.
Look, I think the Liberal Party have won. I haven't got the numbers directly in front of me. I think the Liberal Party have won grey.
You had a very high primary.
But we do not have a preference count at all. I have factored in 70% of Labor preferences to Nick Xenophon's
But on those first preferences, is this right? An 19% swing. 18% swing away from the Liberal Party in the seat of grey. That's a pretty substantial swing, and I would say the one thing I do agree with Nick Xenophon on is Arium and Whyalla is an important issue. What I don't agree with him on is that no one's put something on the table. Labor's made pretty clear with the state government, $100 million plus $50 million from them as a package.
Both parties have made policies
we have no preference count on grey. That will be one of the seats that I'm pretty sure the Electoral Commission will be scrambling to do a recount on.
I think so.
To do the preference count. I've factored in 70% of Labor's preferences to Nick Xenophon's candidate, who's Andrea Broadfoot, and at the moment on the raw numbers it's 51.5 to 48.5 in favour of the Liberal Party. Postal votes will heavily favour the Liberal Party in that electorate, which is why I've got them slightly further ahead.
Anthony, will you please break things down for us state by state?
Sorry. There's a lot happening tonight, isn't there?
You don't need to apologise, just
first, let me look at New South Wales. What we're seeing in New South Wales is a swing of 3.5%. That has settled down through the evening. We've got preference count. It looks like the preference flows might have been stronger to Labor than I'd thought. Let's have a look at Victoria next, a 1.8% swing to Labor, so that's a little bit smaller. If we look at Queensland, 2.6%, but that is wildly variable from seat to seat. So there's quite a different swing there. Let's do Tasmania first, 8.8% swing. If the government is forced into a majority, the election has been decided in potentially Queensland, but also Tasmania. There were 3 seats there popping up, which were not really on anyone's agenda. If we look at South Australia, I have to push that one up. The swing is 3.9%. I must say, Nick Xenophon has not polled as well as expected. It's only a little bit over 20%. Some of the polls were saying more. We've got no Senate figures. It will be interesting to see if voters have sort of looked at it and thought, well, I'll vote for him in the Senate, but I'll vote for a traditional party in the lower house, and that may have been what's happening there. And in Western Australia, on initial figures, we're seeing a 2% swing to Labor again. But I mean, Burt, it's certainly bigger in Burt than in the other electorates.
Well, let's have a bit of a look through some of the seats that will go down to the wire now, and let's start with the seat of Lindsay in Sydney's West, being defended by Fiona Scott up against a candidate who was campaigning on one leg the last time I saw her because she'd done an ACL.
I think it's a substantially stronger result. This result is now firming up for the Labor Party. Emma Hassar is ahead on first preferences, so there's been figures coming in. I presume we've got some pre-poll votes or something or other has now been arriving. Just have a quick look here. We've got lots of pre-polls. Some more to come. But at this stage, it's a 3.5% swing, and that will be a Labor Party gain. And as we've said, Lindsay and Eden Monero, 2 of those bellwether seats, and at this stage, there's a strong chance that Labor could win both of them, which is an interesting result.
And certainly the Labor Party was not hopeful of that seat at the beginning of this evening. All right, they were looking at it, but not necessarily sure they could get it. OK, to the seat of Hindmarsh in South Australia.
We're seeing Matt Williams against Steve Georgianis, a repeat of last time. Matt Williams is the sitting member this time. Last time it was Steve Georgianis. Steve Georgianis is behind. We have a preference count, so it excludes that 15% there with Nick Xenophon's team. It's a 2.5% swing. We've got the Labor Party on 50.6. We're predicting that a Labor Party gain. That's a projection based on past postal and absent and pre-poll trends. So at this stage, it looks like Steve Georgianis has won that seat, and he'd certainly be happy to be ahead rather than behind at this stage.
We're getting that the preferences from NXT are breaking 50-50.
That's the preference count I'm getting from the Commission, so I'd have to...
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to Capricornia in Queensland. Now, this was a seat that has usually, if the LNP gets it, then they lose it at the next election. So if Michelle Landry manages to hold it, it would be quite a feat.
I'll just say on Hindmarsh, there's quite a number of outstanding booths at the moment. Yep. Lisa Neaton's ahead on first preferences. We've got quite a vote there with minor parties, 4 minor parties there, over 4% of the vote, so quite a substantial other vote. The Labor Party's ahead, 50.4. We're not giving that seat away. And at this stage, nobody's won that seat. That seat remains in count. Just Lisa Neaton is leading at this stage.
All right, now to the seat of Ford, which Bert Van Manen managed to hold last time around against a former Queensland Premier. How's he going this time around?
He's had a tougher task this time, and he's ahead by over 500 votes there, behind on 500 votes on the first preferences. And now the Green vote is a bit lower in a seat like that, and it's a substantial vote for the smaller Christian parties there. 50.4 for the Labor Party, so that seat remains in doubt at the end of the night. There's probably a bit more counting to come tonight.
To Longman and the seat held by the Minister for Innovation, Wyatt Roy.
And he's in a great deal of difficulty, and at this stage I think he may actually have lost the seat. He's ahead by about a couple of percent there, 2%. We have a preference count. There's a 9% there with One Nation. The preference count we're getting is the Labor Party's on 51.5, and that's a Labor Party gain. So that's a bad result of course, for Wyatt Roy, but also for the government as one of their younger junior ministers.
And to the seat of Petrie, which was the most marginal seat in the state, so hanging on to this one would be quite a feat.
And at this stage, when we look at the percentages, look, Howarth is ahead, and he's got a reasonable lead on first preferences, 3.3%. The Greens got 7.5% again. There's 5% there with the Family First. Liberal Democrats, of course, got a couple of percent there. It's 50-50 at the end of the night. So that's what's called in doubt.
All right, let's kick across to Western Australia and the seat of Cowan, which again was one of the ones that the Labor Party was hopeful of picking up.
And at this stage, Luke Simpkins up against Anne Alley. We've got 58% of the first preference votes here. I don't know the state of the preference count, but Luke Simpkins is ahead 21025 to 2089, about just on 0.2%. with some votes there for the Greens. Depends where the preference is from. It's 50-50 with the Liberals just ahead at this stage, so we won't be calling that for a while either tonight. I'll just make one other slight comment. I was on the record before the election saying I didn't think that we'd see 12, 13, 14% vote for others, and we have. So I'll admit I didn't think we'd see that, but certainly the vote for others in Queensland was much higher than we expected.
Speaking of Western Australia, the seat of Burt that we've been talking about a little bit tonight, that newly created seat, Matt Keogh, who is the Labor candidate there, is standing by, and he's going to talk to us in just a second. Before we go to him, Chris and Anthony, can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so the seat of Burt is a new seat. It was created for this election, and as Lee just said, this candidate stood in the seat of Canning at the Canning by-election.
Yeah, but no sitting member, new seat, and there's been a substantial swing to the Labor Party in this seat. They've put a lot of effort into it. It was drawn from 3 surrounding seats with the better Labor voting parts of 3 other seats amalgamated in one, but Matt Keogh has put a lot of effort in. He had name recognition from the by-election last year, and he's had a substantial 12.9% swing too, and it's one of the largest swings in the country. It was from an estimated margin on the old thing, but on the old margins. But Matt Keogh will be the new member for the new seat of Burt.
And we've got a line open, I think, to Matt Keogh now, who's standing by in that new seat, the new member for Burt. Now, Matt Keogh, congratulations on winning that seat. You have more entitlement to be exhausted than just about anyone else in this election, given that this is not even the first federal election that you've fought in the last year. You were the unsuccessful candidate for Canning in the by-election. Are you okay?
Thanks, Annabelle. Look, I am okay, and my wife, who's going to be giving birth in only a few weeks, is also okay. It's been a very long campaign, as you said, and a hard-fought one. There was a big margin to overcome here, with areas coming in from 3 different Liberal seats, but I think it's been quite clear in the result we've seen here tonight that the people of Burt were very favourably disposed to the alternative option, the positive policies that were put forward by Bill Shorten and Labor.
Okay, so give us an idea of what are the issues that are really sloshing around in Western Australia. We've got a lot of interference with sort of state and local issues in some other areas of Australia. What's happening in Western Australia?
Well, in WA we've got the coming together, I guess, of 2 Liberal governments that have been overlooking a lot of the needs of the people in the outer suburbs, like we have here in Burt. So not only have people been very concerned about what's going to happen to Medicare and their funding of their schools, but we've also seen a complete lack of investment in essential infrastructure here, both at a state and federal level. I don't think it's missed anybody that the Liberal government allocated $0 to rail projects here in Western Australia when we so desperately need to catch up with our urban growth in these outer suburbs.
You mentioned Medicare, and a lot of your colleagues who have done well in various seats around the place have done the same thing. Do you think that was a bigger and more decisive factor, that health issue that Labor spent a lot of time on in the last few weeks, than some of the more adventurous policies that the Labor Party adopted, like negative gearing and putting a price on carbon?
I think it's undoubtable that Medicare was a key issue out in these suburbs of Burt and outer suburbs across the country, because the hip pocket is important and people understand that changes to Medicare were going to hurt them in their daily lives. So that was a very important aspect. But you know, other key areas of Labor policy which might not have got the headlines every day across the national media were also very important. People have been very critical here about the lack of NBN rollout, the delays that we've seen. We've got some big chunks of the electorate of Burt that don't even have access to ADSL2. NBN was supposed to be making sure we could come into the 21st century, and instead we've been stuck right back in the middle of the 20th century under this government.
Western Australia's got a reasonably unpopular state government just at the minute. Do you think that that had an impact on your result at all?
Look, I think the way in which Liberals, whether they're federal or state, have really ignored the growing outer suburbs where we've had such immense growth. I mean, I can tell you that suburbs like Harrisdale, Piara, Waters, Southern River in the seat of Burt are the fastest growing suburbs in the state right now. And the lack of forward planning and infrastructure investment has been a really big issue, and the traffic congestion that's resulted has been a huge concern for people. Now, the planning of that is of course a state government responsibility, but part of that funding has to come from a federal government. So the Liberals of both persuasions have really let this area down, and I think that's cut across.
You, of course, were in an incredibly good position to observe what the response was in Western Australia to the change of leadership that happened last year. Has your estimation on the effect that that had on the electorate that you purport to represent did it make a big difference? And has your opinion changed on that?
Oh, look, I think it was quite clear that when Malcolm Turnbull knifed Tony Abbott, there was this huge sigh of relief across the country. We saw that in Western Australia, though it should be noted that the areas of Canning that came into the electorate of Burt did support Labor and voted for me in that election. And so they had already seen through what was going to happen, and I think many people around the country have now seen and has come to the fore in this election, which is Mr Turnbull is of course leading a government with the same policies, the same broken promises around funding and health education, and that I think has really cut through.
Right, well, Matt Keogh, best of luck to you. Congratulations on becoming the new MP for Western Australia's newest and rather adorably named electorate, Burt. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Scott Morrison, I'm going to get your thoughts on something in a minute, but first I want to get Chris Uhlmann's analysis on it. With the way the results are coming in for the coalition, the closeness of it, would you expect there to be some serious blowback against Malcolm Turnbull from the right wing of the party?
Well, Malcolm Turnbull was hired to save marginal electorates. That was essentially the reason he was put there, because they thought that Tony Abbott wouldn't. I would say that I think that the coalition would have resoundingly lost this election if Tony Abbott was leading the party to the election. I don't think that there's any doubt about that, but I don't know that he will be given the benefit of the doubt by many if he manages to crawl over the line. Is 76, 77, 78 seats. It makes it very tenuous time in Parliament House, and anyone who was there any time when you're within a couple of members in the House, that's a toilet break away from losing a vote in the House of Representatives. So that puts pressure on the Prime Minister, creates an environment. And the other thing too is the Prime Minister went to a double dissolution election so that he could pass through the Parliament the two bills that he said were essential for his economic plan. Now, whether or not they faded from light, it would now seem almost impossible that that joint sitting can go ahead. And how the government then progresses its agenda, first perhaps even through negotiating its way through the House of Representatives, but let's assume that what looks like is going to happen happens and the government is returned with a couple of members in the House of Representatives. It's going to have an incredibly fractious Senate. It will be a long and difficult ride for whoever is leading this government.
This is a bit poetic, isn't it, or biblical perhaps, that of the coalition figures who have lost their seats tonight, two of the, well, certainly the most surprising one, Wyatt Roy, the Innovation Minister, and the member for Eden Monaro, outgoing, Peter Hendy, were two of the closest lieutenants that Malcolm Turnbull had in taking the leadership from Tony Abbott.
And look, I can't speak for Wyatt Roy. Peter Hendy shows what happens when you have somebody in a marginal seat who does not treat it like a marginal seat. Peter Hendy, if he came into Parliament, should have gone into the Senate. I've had complaints from his own people that they were standing in the cold, handing out how to vote cards at pre-poll while he was sitting in the press club in Canberra, not just at the Prime Minister's speech, but at a number of speeches. His absence was noted through the course of this campaign by the people who are working on his behalf. There are no surprises there. And I'll say this is an MP who kept saying to me, why do you keep talking to this as if it's a target seat? Because it was. Bill Shorten didn't go there was the last thing that he said to me. Well, Bill Shorten didn't need to go there because the Labor Party thought they'd bagged this ages ago.
We'll come back to this in a moment, but Barnaby Joyce is standing by in New England, so let's go to him now. Congratulations. Look at the smile on your face. Congratulations.
You haven't won yet, Barnaby.
Well,
Senator Joyce, how are you reading things?
Well, it's great. I've got the Killer Canaries behind me. It's a great night. It's a great night for the team. And in music, as I said before, in Music City, we know how to celebrate. And we're going to be celebrating tonight. It's a great outcome for all the people who put so much hard work into running the campaign, into handing out the how to vote cards, into doing all the things that get you across the line. But you can't fatten a pig on market day. We started this campaign 3 years ago. We knew it was going to be tough, and we've fought as hard, and we've been well rewarded tonight. We're across the line on primaries.
It was an extraordinarily vitriolic campaign there in New England. Why did it get so rough?
I wish it hadn't. We didn't want to. We always made an offer that said, you do no negative campaigning, we do no negative campaigning. But it became personal and barbed. I don't think that's good. And to be quite frank, and it's a job for the Fourth Estate, a lot of this campaign, especially by the Labor Party towards the end, was premised on lies, that they were going to privatise Medicare. They never were. We were going to reduce pensions. We never were. People being robo-called in the middle of the night with just lies. Lies to vulnerable people. It's a disgrace. And we've got to make sure that whether it's in a political form or with the Fourth Estate, and you've got responsibility in this too, you've got to hold these people to account and say, you say they're privatising Medicare. Where did you get that from? Did you make it up? Where's it from? Because if this becomes the modus operandi in campaigns, then it's to hell and oblivion that we'll end up with. We've got to straighten this show up.
Can you give us a sense, Senator Joyce, overall of the National Party's performance tonight?
Look, I'm really proud of the work that our team has done. It looks like as we speak we're not going to lose one seat, and we're going to pick a seat up. And all of that's a great outcome for us. Hard-working team. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources, but by gosh, we got the people. And we go street by street, we go pub by pub, we go club by club, we go CWA hall by CWA hall. We work our areas, and so that on election day we give ourselves the best chance. But we can only do it when we come forward with the agenda that is good for their electorate and good for our nation. We believe in our nation, we believe in a strong nation, and we sell that vision and we stand behind it proudly, and the people make their choice. And tonight they voted for the National Party. Sorry
that I keep calling you Senator. I've known you too long. I can't keep track of what your job is now.
It's all right. I always think Senator's kind of cute. Sounds very good, especially if you're going through customs in the United States of America. Doesn't work so well over here.
It's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Look, overall, obviously, it's a very close election result. How does the National Party feel about the performance of your Liberal Party colleagues and the way that Malcolm Turnbull has led this campaign?
Look, I want to make this very clear. I get along very well with Malcolm Turnbull. I've had a number of conversations with him tonight. Malcolm Turnbull is most definitely the best person to lead our nation in a time of uncertainties, and we're seeing that through Brexit. I'll have to be frank. The idea that Bill Shorten, for all his qualities and all that he has, he just does not have the attributes to be able to manage our nation through uncertain times. Malcolm Turnbull has proven it in his private life and his business life, and I want to work with Malcolm Turnbull to make sure that our nation is in a strong position. Because the things, I'll give you a classic one. Turnbull believes in building dams, and so do I, and that's why we've got a dams policy. Mr Shorten wants to take half the money away. He doesn't believe in building dams. How do we deliver an outcome for the North if we don't build dams? He doesn't believe in the decentralisation. We believe in decentralisation. He doesn't believe in the Rural Investment Corporation. We do. And this is very important because other people out there tonight might be making decisions about what side they would support. Look at our policies, look at what we do. We want to work with all Australians to build a bigger Australia, and I think we know which side of government's going to do that.
Barnaby Joyce, you have lost an enormous amount of skin this evening, and we can tell just from the way that these percentages are falling that you're going to have a difficult time in the Senate. So how do you govern?
Well, we govern with the belief that people see the best outcome for their nation and don't hold the nation to ransom. We certainly negotiate for your best position, no problems about that. But we don't hold the nation to ransom, because no matter where you are, you can't have a strong seat unless you've got a strong nation. You can't be a strong senator if you hold the nation to ransom. People will not respect that. They want an effective run of things. And if the Labor Party had one tonight, people would want them to get an effective run of things. Ultimately, you've got to have a government that has the capacity to govern. And that responsibility resides not only in the two and the three and the four parliamentary parties, but it also resides on the shoulders of those who maybe by a fluke or fortune or hard work might have that responsibility tonight. They must put their shoulder to the effective government of their nation, which means they've got to make good decisions and they've got to make hard decisions.
Mr Joyce, if it does turn into a hung parliament, would you rather go back to another election than live 3 years like that?
That's complete hypothetical. I wouldn't dare.
It's not that
discuss
hypothetical.
at this point in time. Well, I will wait. I will wait till the look. We've got pre-polls coming in. As you know, pre-polls swing our way, and postal votes spring our way. And so let's not start making discussions about that until the appropriate time. I think generally that people want that. We've just had an 8-week campaign. What do you want? You want a few more weeks? You're not quite tired of it yet. I
could go another 8.
Let's go again.
No worries.
Let's go again. I'm up for it.
Mate, I don't think even Muhammad Ali, God rest his soul, wanted to do that.
Listen, a Conservative commentator, I won't name, let's just call him, I don't know, Andrew Bolt, is already saying that Malcolm Turnbull should just resign now, tonight. What's your response to that?
No, I disagree with that. I don't think the Australian people want this revolving door of Prime Ministers. I certainly don't. I've had a couple of calls with Malcolm tonight, and I'm looking forward to Malcolm being the Prime Minister of our nation, and the National Party will do our best job on the correct terms to support him in that process.
Can you tell us when you had the calls and what was the nature of the call?
Oh, we talk all the time. I wake up in the morning and there's just well, I've had 2 conversations with him tonight.
And what was he saying?
He said, "Hey Barney, how are you?" And I said, "I'm really well, Malcolm. It's going really well. I just won the seat in New England on primary votes." And he said, "Oh, that's good." I said, "How are you going, Malcolm?" He said, "Oh, not too bad." I said, "You should come up to Music City. We can have a bit of a party. Have a look. Lots of fun."
Is he on his way?
Yeah, we'd like to see him at some point tonight.
Everybody else is. Why not?
Any parting words for Johnny Depp?
Bye-bye, Johnny.
Barnaby Joyce, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for the advertising, Johnny. Thanks for the advertising.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Barnaby Joyce.
There'll be a few hairs of the dog drunk there tomorrow morning.
Oh,
won't there?
boom tish.
I think they've got a head start, quite frankly. Anyway, we're moving right along on that. Well, let's have a look at some of those independents and regional contests, and we'll start in New England, and Anthony Green could take us through how the numbers fell.
Barnaby Joyce versus Tony Windsor, the contest we didn't have last time, but we do have it this time. And Barnaby Joyce is the clear winner. He's 33,000 to just under 19,000, 51.5% to 29%. And after preferences, 58% for the National Party. And so Barnaby Joyce is returned to Parliament, currently Deputy Prime Minister. Be probably, on the current numbers, probably Deputy Prime Minister after tonight, but there'll be a fair bit more counting to come before everything's absolutely confirmed.
All right, speaking of New South Wales comebacks, Rob Oakeshott made a comeback to politics, or tried to again, up against Luke Hutsucker in the seat of Cowper. How did that go?
We don't have a preference count. We have a preference estimate in this electorate, but the National Party first preference vote is strong enough to make me think that Luke Hutsucker should win this seat at this stage. We've got him as a national retainer. There has been a significant swing, but I can't see that he's going to lose that seat. And you must remember, with independents, they do not do well with the absent vote and postal votes because they're not as well organised on those things. So I would expect, given how far ahead he is now, that's not going to be turned around. And
well, Rob wouldn't have even run something like that because he nominated on the day nominations closed.
Yeah.
So, but you know, he walks away with a bit of a payday.
All right, well, let's move down to Victoria and the seat of Indi, which was taken from Sophie Mirabella last time round by Cathy McGowan. A contest was run again, and the result was the same.
Yes, and let's look at the first preferences here, and we'll pause on this because you need to look at the overall numbers here. 34.7 for Cathy McGowan. I thought she might have done better on first preferences, actually. The reappearance of the National Party has probably sort of eaten into what might have been some extra votes for her. 10% with Eric Kerr from the Labor Party. We have a preference count in this electorate, and we are projecting forward that it'll be 53.8%. I think she's far enough ahead. I think with Labor preferences, strong Labor preferences flows, and we are getting a preference count that Cathy McGowan should be returned as a member of Indi.
All right, up to Queensland in the seat of Kennedy, held by Bob Katter and the family for almost forever.
Yes, and in what may be an important, this is the second Conservative-held seat, which might be important for the balance of power after Indi there. Bob Katter has increased his vote at this election. He had a bit of a dip down in his vote last time, I suspect probably because he was too busy outside of his electorate. This time he hasn't. He's concentrated on North Queensland, concentrated on his electorate, and his vote is returned, and Bob Katter is very comfortably returned, and I think we'll be hearing more of Bob for the next couple of days.
All right, to Northern Victoria, where the Liberal and the National parties went head-to-head for the seat of Murray.
Sharman Stone retiring. This was a traditional National Party seat. They really did make a mess of their pre-selection back in 1996. They took 2 goes and probably still picked the wrong candidate. Sharman Stone won it then with her retirement. At this stage, we're getting a preference count between the Nationals and the Liberals, and we've got the Nationals on 55.7, and on the numbers we've got, they should go on to win that. And so Damien Drum, having resigned from the Legislative Council, now moves on to represent Murray and captures the seat back for the National Party.
Scott Morrison, I wanted to come back to you on a couple of things. Are you guys done?
Anthony.
Oh, Anthony's doing ooh.
Okay, I'm oohing a bit.
we noticed that you were oohing. We wondered what it was about.
I'll go through my Anthony Green handbook.
It's like an emoji.
So look, what happened is the projected figure I've had, the Liberal vote, the coalition dipped down to 74, then went back to 75 and up to 76. What's happened is Lindsay is firmed up as being a Labor victory, but the LNP has now pulled back ahead in Petrie.
Are we able to listen to John Howard? I can see John Howard.
Is that he fought a very strong, clear campaign, and I congratulate him for that. I take the opportunity of saying it looks as though a number of people I know very well have lost, and I grieve for them. I particularly grieve for the defeat of Andrew Nikolic, a wonderful brigadier in the Australian Army, the member for Bass, for Karen McNamara, been a wonderful representative in the Central Coast seat of Dobell, and also my former employee Jamie Briggs, who appears to have lost the seat of Mayo. And can I say to those who are hanging on as the count proceeds to wafer thin outcomes, I wish them all the very best, but as I said a moment ago, it is for the Prime Minister to speak on behalf of the Coalition in relation to the overall campaign. Thank you.
Mr Howard, was it a mistake for the Liberal Party to go up?
That was John Howard there, arriving at the Wentworth Hotel for the Liberal Party function. So one would assume that if he's arriving there, perhaps we might be hearing from the Prime Minister soon, Chris?
Well, I guess they're wondering what they're going to say. I know that the quote that comes to mind is the one that Julia Gillard made in 2010, when she when she said, "The Australian people have spoken, we just don't know what they've said yet." I think that might be a good way to start the speech.
Well, he's too busy calling Barnaby Joyce. I don't expect him anytime soon.
I might go back to Barry Cassidy, because he's going to be getting up early in the morning for Insiders, so I'll just get his final take on things. So Barry, just overall, any additional thoughts that you wanted to add for the evening?
Well, I'll give you the sense of the sort of talking points that we'll be picking up on tomorrow on Insiders, and they are quite extraordinary. It could be now that the Coalition will not win more than 74 seats, which means they need 76, and of course 77, allowing for a Speaker. Who do they go to? Certainly not Wilkie, certainly not Band. That leaves 3. They'd need all 3. Rebecca Sharkey from the Xenophon Party, Cathy McGowan, Bob Catter. You could probably lock in Bob Catter, but not the other 2. So in other words, nothing guaranteed there. Labor, 71 seats perhaps. They can't form a government. They would need all of those, and they won't get them. So it is possible that neither party will be able to persuade the Governor-General that they have a workable majority, and of course in that situation, there is the potential to go back for another election. Now, I just say this is another interesting talking point as well we'll pick up tomorrow. Even though Malcolm Turnbull got more seats than Bill Shorten, after tonight, Bill Shorten's leadership is in fact more secure than Malcolm Turnbull's. And that is because Malcolm Turnbull appealed for stability. He didn't get it. He called a double dissolution election and tried to sort out the Senate. Probably made matters worse. Have a look at this. 2 Hansons. Pauline Hanson looks like getting a Senate seat in New South Wales. 2 Lambies and a Hinch. Now, that's the end result, so there's a real issue now around Malcolm Turnbull's judgment and his leadership, and of course, just a huge question mark over where the country goes from here. We'll be picking all that up on Insiders.
Who are your guests in the morning, Barry?
Our guests in the morning, Brendan O'Connor and Josh Frydenberg will be spinning it from their party's point of view. Nick Xenophon will be, once he collects his thoughts overnight, will be joining us from South Australia. And the panel is Dennis Atkins, Laura Tingle and Nikki Saba.
We really appreciate you coming in tonight to bring your analysis, Barry, because it's just, your experience is so fantastic and you just bring so much to the coverage. So thank you very much for coming in to do that, even though you've got to be up so early tomorrow.
Thank you.
Scott Morrison, let me pick up on something that Barry was talking about there. Is Malcolm Turnbull fatally wounded? Are we going to be watching the slow death of Malcolm Turnbull?
No.
Because
Not at all. I mean, I believe we'll be able to form a majority government based on what we're seeing tonight, and in the seats that are still hanging in the balance. I would be confident that we would at least get to 76 on the basis of that, and potentially better once all the other votes come in. And in the Liberal Party, when you win, that gives you the opportunity to then go and govern. And Malcolm would have pulled off this victory, which, a year ago was not looking like that at all.
But he hasn't exactly united the team behind him, and one can only imagine the sort of talk that'll be going on in the right wing of the party tonight.
I would disagree with that totally. This has been a very disciplined outing by the Prime Minister, and right across the whole team, and he's led that from the front.
There's a lot of people in the party that don't like him.
Look, I don't know where you get what you base that on, frankly.
My dealings with people in the right wing of the party.
Well, if people are going to say things without saying them to people's faces, well, that's a matter for them. But what I'm saying is that a Prime Minister who I think is on track to win this election and to be able to form a majority in the House of Representatives, that's what these elections are about.
Even on your best case scenario, Scott, it's the most slender imaginable majority, and to be going with that tiny majority into the kind of bruising argument that you're planning for the rest of the year on same-sex marriage, surely that's
I don't think that will be it's a relevant consideration at this point in time.
Well, it'll be relevant by the end of the year.
What I'm saying is a majority government has the ability to put bills and laws into the Parliament and pass them through the House of Representatives and then move them through the Senate. That's what government's about. We have elections to form governments, and at the moment there's only one party that is in a position to form a majority government tonight. It's not the Labor Party. They have their second lowest primary vote on record, going back to the early 1900s. And for that to be seen as some sort of victory, I think is an interesting take on historical events. We're in a position to be able to form a majority government, and we may even know that by much later this evening. But we are looking, I think, confidently at picking up those remainder seats that remain
Can you just tell us which ones you think you're likely to pick up?
Well, look, you've got to play the balance of probabilities here, but we've got, even on your own figures, and there are others that sit in the figures that you've already transferred across to the Labor Party column, which I'd question. But certainly when you're talking about Capricorn, Cowan and Hindmarsh, and you're on 74 and you've got to pick two up of those. Now, in addition to that, if you go to the other seats, which you have as changing hands, well, looking across those, I still wouldn't write off Longman. I still certainly wouldn't write off Lindsay or Herbert, or, arguably, possibly Macquarie. But all of those seats are potentially all still winnable by the Liberal Party.
Let me ask you this. Could you have won this election if Tony Abbott was still the leader?
Well, look, that is a matter that we will never know.
Oh, what do you think?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think the party room made its own judgment on that last September.
So you think Malcolm Turnbull's done better tonight for you than Tony Abbott would have been able to?
I think the party room made that judgment last year and tonight.
Come on, it's 20 to 11 on election night. Can we just answer that question straight?
Well, I think that's obvious.
Can I say, I've just had a text message from someone in the coalition that puts it this way: abject failure for Turnbull and a massive problem for the plotters. Should be fun.
Yeah, if I can just respond briefly, I thought that was a very good, what's the Monty Python skit? The Black Knight routine. But the reality is Malcolm Turnbull is in enormous strife tonight. This is a very bad result for the Liberal Party. We've seen divisions for a long period of time leading up to the leadership change, and since then we saw them in the campaign around marriage equality and other issues. I think we will see those divisions more greatly. What has Malcolm delivered? He's lost seats, he's had a slogan, not a plan, and we look like we've got Pauline Hanson in the Parliament. That is not a great result for the Liberal Party, and I think he's in a bit of strife.
We're going to have a look at one of the key seats tonight, which is Dobell, which is a New South Wales Central Coast seat. It's a marginal Labor seat due to a redistribution, I think. The Labor candidate, Emma McBride, is standing by. We're going to come to her in a second, but just before we do, Chris, tell us a bit more about this seat.
Yeah, always considered to be a bellwether, but then the redistribution did put it in the Labor Party's camp, and it's, as we said at the outset, you do have to win these seats, Anthony.
Yeah, and it was actually, given the circumstances of Craig Thompson, it was always remarkable that Labor did as well as they did last time. The former Labor member, the later independent member of the seat, Emma McBride, is ahead by 7% on first preferences, as we discussed the redistributions. I think One Nation, 8.5% there is another factor, that the One Nation vote just seems to have does not have a strong flow of preferences either way. So the Labor Party's got 55.4. There's been a 5.3%. It's a retain, or it can be a gain, depending on which way you want to classify the seat. We've classified it by the votes, and therefore Emma McBride is seen as winning that seat at this election.
Yes, she is. She's joining us now. She's in Batteau Bay, standing by very patiently with many, many happy supporters behind her. Welcome to the program, Emma McBride, and congratulations on regaining the seat of Dobell. Can you hear me there?
Thank you very much.
Oh, you can. That's excellent. What well-behaved supporters you have. Now, you've won the seat pretty concertedly with a swing of about 5%. But we were just talking about the strong showing of One Nation in the vote. Were you aware of that during the campaign?
This has been a really positive campaign. It's been a community-led campaign. We've made contact with over 50,000 people throughout the campaign through door knocking, street stalls and train stations. So I think from the Labor Party perspective, the things that we've spoken about, healthcare and hospitals, education, have been really important, and that's what's made the difference in this election.
Now, your opponent, Karen McNamara, was famously the recipient of campaign help from Tony Abbott's supporters in Warringah, who decided they would go and help Fiona Scott in the seat of Lindsay because she had betrayed him for Malcolm Turnbull. Did you notice the Abbott helpers around the place?
We had so many volunteers helping in this campaign. We've had over 215 individual people participate in the Labor campaign. This has been a real community-led, community-driven campaign.
Okay, so what would you describe as the biggest policy factor that you noticed being influential in the result that we've seen tonight in Dobell?
I think definitely, I'm a pharmacist and I've worked at Wyong Hospital for the last 10 years, and I think healthcare and hospitals, I think that's what really matters in our community. That's what they care about and that's what they've spoken.
Okay. What about all those issues? Like, did you notice were you asked much, or did the issue of Labor's negative gearing policy get ventilated with you very much? Did you hear about that?
No, mostly what people were telling me was about health and hospitals and education and Gonski funding. That's what people were telling me throughout the whole of the campaign.
You are a very concise question answer.
I was just thinking what a different show 7:30 would be if all my guests answered so succinctly.
Can I say that we applaud it, by the way.
That's right.
Don't take it the wrong way.
Absolutely. Yeah, 10 points. Penny and Scott, take lessons.
Absolutely. Give you just a little session with all of the other MPs so that you could give them lessons on how to answer concisely.
I'm one of 7 children. You had to be concise to get a word in edgeways.
Well, do you know what? It sounds like you are entering a parliament where your skills will be required. You're from a big family of shouty people.
My 5 brothers, my 5 brothers and 1 sister have trained me very, very well.
Well, I have no further questions.
No. I come from a family of 6 and you had to fight for the food.
I was just going to say, I don't want to sit at a dinner table with Emma McBride because I reckon she'd be... Just get the food.
Congratulations on your victory tonight and regaining Dobell for the ALP. That's Emma McBride.
Thank you. Also the politest supporters I've ever seen. So quiet, so quiet and well behaved. They must just be tired running at a puff like us. Yeah. Now let's go to Labor Party headquarters, and Sabra Lane is standing by. Sabra, any idea when we might actually hear from Bill Shorten?
Look, I understand that Bill Shorten will be arriving here shortly, but with me right now, Lee, I've got Brendan O'Connor, the Shadow Employment Minister, and also the member for Gorton. And first of all, congratulations, you've increased your margin and hold on Gorton.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks very much, Sabra. Yes, 70% two-party preferred. Look, a great effort and a great result, I think, for Labor and led by Bill Shorten. By way of comparison, as Penny was saying, a very bad result for the Liberal Party and in particular for Malcolm Turnbull, who was really conscripted into that position to collect votes, to increase the vote for the Liberal Party. That was the one thing he was supposed to do. He failed to do that.
Would you have done this well if Tony Abbott had still been Prime Minister?
We'll never know. What we do know is the one thing that Malcolm Turnbull was supposed to deliver to the Liberal Party, he failed tonight, and as a result, We'll be going to bed tonight not knowing who's going to form government, and we're going to bed tonight knowing this, that there's going to be dysfunction and instability and internal division within the Liberal Party.
Now, Scott Morrison was saying earlier that he still thinks that a majority government is still a possibility. Do you agree?
Well, he thinks, right? Yeah, because he doesn't know, because nobody knows, and that's the point, isn't it? I think it's true to say that there were naysayers and sceptics, but the reality was Labor has led throughout this campaign. Bill has out-campaigned Malcolm Turnbull. Bill brought together the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, and the team has worked united together. We led on policy. We campaigned well over the last 8 weeks, and that's why you see a pretty good result tonight.
What are the lessons? There's discussion tonight that Pauline Hanson possibly has 2, maybe 3 seats. Darren Hinch, we've got a number of the micro parties look like they're getting up on the Senate crossbench.
Well, they're not my cup of tea, certainly Pauline Hanson. But, you know, when you have a Prime Minister who thinks he's cleverer than anyone else in the room and actually decides to have a double dissolution, on what was it again? What was the double dissolution for? He reduced the quota, which has led, of course, to even more minor parties or independents possibly winning spots in the Senate. It hasn't made things easier. So the whole plan was predicated on a strategy that failed, just like, of course, the campaign failed for the Liberal Party. Now, you know, we don't know what the result will be, but we do know this. Malcolm Turnbull is not popular within the Liberal Party. He was put there for one reason, and tonight he's failed.
And the public, with this result, and they've also chosen a lot of other candidates, that they've delivered a hung parliament. What does that say to you?
Well, sure, that does say that the political parties have to try harder to make their message clearer, to convince people that there is a plan. But I think Labor, we were not perfect by any means, but what we did was this. We were united, we outlined policies, and we were upfront with the Australian people, and we led in the policy areas, and the government followed. And I think for that reason, we've done quite well tonight.
OK, under the new leadership rules under the Labor Party, if you do happen to fall short, the leadership will be opened up. Should there be a challenger to Bill Shorten?
Look, that's up to people who may want to consider that. I, for one, believe that Bill Shorten has the support of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. He's done an excellent job. As I say, he out-campaigned Malcolm Turnbull, and I do believe he'll remain leader.
Brendan O'Connor, thank you, and congratulations again.
Thanks, Barbara.
This is the Wentworth Hotel where the Liberal faithful are gathering to hear from Malcolm Turnbull. We saw the former Prime Minister John Howard arrive there a short time ago. It's anyone's guess when the PM might be there. And this is the ABC Election Centre from where we are all broadcasting this evening. Thank you very much for sticking with us at this late hour and after hours and hours of coverage. It is 10 to 11 on the East Coast, 10 to 9 in Western Australia.
Can I say that the looking at that, what it reminds me most of, I was with the Julia Gillard camp in the 2010 election, and you could sense the gas go out of the room at a certain stage in the evening when they realised they didn't really know what was going on, and that would appear to be pretty much the same mood there, although I can't hear it, obviously.
I'm hearing that Bill Shorten is less than a minute away, so I'm going to hand over to Greg Jennett, and he can tell us what the mood is like there while we wait for Bill Shorten to arrive. Greg.
Yes, feel free to take over at any moment if in fact Bill Shorten does. But just picking up, Lee, on something Chris Uhlmann was talking about, that sense of disbelief, that what just happened here factor that you're tapping into so vibrantly in your broadcast is as nothing compared with what's happening here at the Malcolm Turnbull function in Sydney. So they've lit the podium, which is an indication that he does intend to come down and talk to the true blue Liberal faithful before too long. But this is an extremely glum mood here, and it has been for hours now. Great uncertainty layered in over the top of that too. I'm told that 3 years ago, when this was the victory venue for Tony Abbott, this room was pumping and was absolutely full all night long. if you look over past the podium, there are large swathes of carpet that are just uncovered with Liberal Party members tonight. Some we actually saw leaving earlier. Others have decided to stick around now that there is at least some tangible sign that the Prime Minister will eventually speak to them. Evidently, I suppose we could conclude that there's some sort of agreement with Bill Shorten where he most likely will go first, we're hearing, and then evidently the Prime Minister will follow. But look, some people, many have remained, to be fair, some have left, and they are tearing their hair out here, talking from their perspective as Liberal Party members in true disbelief at the turn of events that we've seen unfold.
And Greg, are there many well-known faces there among the Liberal crowd? We saw the former Prime Minister John Howard go in a little while ago.
Yes, and I read into that he wouldn't have come, I presume, if this was known to be a concession speech. So I'm assuming his arrival was timed and coordinated to at least make that speech that we're anticipating, which is we don't quite know what the nation has said. I imagine that's the tenor of Malcolm Turnbull's address when he comes. But beyond that, Lee, this is a very controlled event, just as the whole campaign has been conducted. So very few front benches available for us to talk to. Matthias Cormann was allowed down to be the official campaign spokesman earlier. We did talk to him, but no, we're not at liberty to talk to others. There are none here that I've seen. A few party presidents like Larry Anthony from the Nationals. But beyond that, it's just rank and file members. And as I say, a mood of very glum realisation that this is not the result they came here expecting.
So, Greg, we have at the moment, just for our viewers, there's a box in the corner of our screen that's showing the Labor Party function at which we're expecting Bill Shorten to arrive sometime soon. It's obviously going to be more than a minute. What a surprise on election night that you'd get told a minute and then it stretches out to be much longer. It's always the way it goes. So, Greg, we might leave you for a second and come back. Instead, we might go to a summary. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're just shy of 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 p.m. on the West Coast. 70% of the vote has been counted, and at this stage, we're calculating a 2.9% swing to the Labor Party. The ABC will not be calling the result of this election this evening. We believe that it will come down to pre-poll votes. Michael Rowland is standing by to give us a little bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Lee. Up in the balconies here, I'm starting to feel like the Phantom of the Opera, but I promise not to sing. Now, we have up above me the map of Australia, and it reflects the truly close nature of this election tonight as we wait to hear from both the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader. And there you see only 1, 2, 3, 4 undecided seats, in fact 5 undecided seats, and conveniently I happen to be standing under the great state of Western Australia. So let's break down the seat by seat result there, and we see the coalition on 11 seats and the Labor Party picking up 4 seats. No joy at all for the Greens and independent candidates. So a fairly good result there for the Labor Party in Western Australia, a swing of 2.4%. Let's break down the results in some of those key seats in WA, starting in the seat of Brand. It was vacated just before the last election, just before this election rather, by long-serving Labor MP Gary Gray, and there we see a win by the Labor candidate Madeleine King, a swing to her of about 7%, defeating her Liberal opponent there. Let's look now at another seat vacated by a high-profile Labor identity. Alana McTiernan was the former member for Perth. Tim Hammond has retained that seat for the Labor Party with a slight swing in his favour of 0.6%. Let's look now at the seat of Cowan, a Liberal Party-held seat. The Labor Party put a lot of effort and a lot of resources in too over the last 8 weeks. The Labor Party candidate is high-profile terrorism expert Anne Alley. She has managed to get a swing in her favour of 4.3%, but the ABC is predicting it is still a Liberal, not gain yet, but the Liberal MP Lute Simpkins is ahead in that seat. It is still far too close to call, as is, Lee, this general election.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm wondering maybe if it might be an opportunity while we wait for Bill Shorten to arrive to have a little bit of a chat about what would happen if we ended up in a hung parliament situation, because both the major parties have said that they would not do any sort of formal deal with the Greens or with a party to govern in coalition. So I understand. Anthony's giving me a wave that he's full box and dice on this. I'm not surprised at all.
Good start.
What a shame, Anthony, because I prepared my own notes earlier about this very scenario. And now you are apparently going to steal my thunder. It's extremely disappointing, but please go ahead.
In a situation like this, under our constitutional structure, the party in power has the opportunity to be the first to form government. There is a significant difference between this election and what happened in 2010. In 2010, the coalition had more seats once you included Tony Crook from Western Australia, who had that argument backwards and forwards about that. Labor had cobbled together everybody else in the crossbench. In this situation, it may be, if the coalition is a minority, they've got 74 seats. If they only end up with 74 seats, then they're better positioned from Labor, who would probably only end up with at most 69 or 70. So Labor would have to get all the crossbenchers to back them to form government, and that's much harder. And a comparable situation would be South Australia in 2002, when Labor under Mike Rann ended up 1 seat short of majority. The Liberal Party government had to get all 4 crossbenchers on side, and one of them broke and went with the Labor Party. And I think that would be the situation here. One of the crossbenchers, or 2 of them, would find it very much in their favour to put the government back into office. The only way that the government could be blasted out of office if it had some sort of arrangement like that, or if it was close enough to majority, would to be voted out. But the worst scenario would be if the Gillard government had won 1 fewer seat in 2010, that parliament could not have survived because it was a deadlock in an even-numbered chamber. With the crossbenchers, the Gillard government had just 1 vote to get a majority. If this is the final result, then Malcolm Turnbull will be better positioned than Julia Gillard, but it would still be a demeaning result to have lost the majority. And from the first look at the Senate figures just look very difficult to deal with.
So is what would happen, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you would have the party that is most likely to be able to form a government. It looks like it would be the coalition, but who knows? They face a confidence motion on the floor of the House. The independents then decide, and the minor parties decide if they're going to support them in a confidence motion or if they're going to back them to...
Well, technically there isn't a thing called a confidence motion. Governments are appointed by the Crown and they act for the Crown.
Right.
And you can express no confidence in the advisors to the Crown.
Right.
So you can bring a government down, but there isn't such a thing as a confidence vote.
But wouldn't the first thing, though, that the party that wasn't in government do, move a confidence motion?
First thing to do is elect the Speaker. That is always the first test of a government after an election, is can the government elect their person as the Speaker.
But we could end up, could we not, with a situation where you have the independents and the minor parties decide, OK, well, we're going to basically back the coalition in supply and in confidence motions, but every other piece of legislation will weigh up on its merits.
That's right, but essentially, if the government chose to tough it out, they would have to be blasted out. You have to bring them down with a no confidence motion, and it depends on how it's done. I mean, you can have sort of all sorts of motions which the government can survive, which you might call no confidence. But that's what the constitutional scenario is. When we don't know the final numbers yet, that will have to all wait. And this one, to me, this really does look like you'll have to wait for all the votes to be counted. In 2010, it was clear on the Monday what the numbers were. It's just everybody let it hang out for 2 weeks. But this one, I think we really are going to have to wait for those last seats.
Yeah, I think what happens first is a very long negotiation. And that the way I understood what the Labor Party was saying all the way along, and what I understand the government would be doing, is that in the first instance, government is formed on the floor of the House of Representatives. If you can get the number, then you have the right to govern. So I don't think that anyone was ruling out the possibility that they would negotiate, just that they wouldn't sign a contract in the way that the Labor Party signed a contract with the Greens to, that's what Julia Gillard did. So that there would be a negotiation, and in the first instance, it would be down to the government to try and see if they could get the numbers. Now, look at the people we've got. Well, you can rule out the Greens and you can rule out Andrew Wilkie being on the government side, which means that you'd have to go for Nick Xenophon, Bob Katter and Cathy McGowan to try and get the government across the line. But it's probably we're probably a long way ahead of the game in terms of where this is likely to play out, and haven't counted all the votes yet.
Is how we've just run through those options how you two understand that it would evolve?
Well, the government would need to give an assurance to the Governor-General that they can they have an assurance of supply, and that is something that a Prime Minister would have to do to get the Governor-General's commission to form a government, and that's basically how it works. Yeah.
And is that just a sort of verbal agreement, I guess, that you have then with...
Yeah. It's actually much more important in this situation because the budget hasn't been passed yet.
The Governor General would be seeking a confirmation of the assurances of supply.
Well, that the Prime Minister has the confidence of the House.
Can I ask Anthony one more question?
Which would then be tested. I think Anthony is right.
This is a very important question, Anthony. You said based on Senate results that you're beginning to see. Could you share those Senate results with us? Because
look, it's very ropey.
It might be rough and ropey, but let's have a crack.
Everything's ropey.
We're having a crack at everything else, so we might have a crack at this.
Oh, look, it's very difficult to beat them into any shape. There's a significant vote for all sorts of other parties. The coalition certainly has lost several seats. Labor, the Greens don't seem to be doing well, but it's rather difficult to know where the vote's coming from. But certainly Jackie Lammy's doing well, Pauline Hanson's doing well, Darren Hinch's doing well, Nick Xenophon's doing well in South Australia, and the Greens I don't think are doing much better. There's been quite a distribution of votes.
Anyone in Western Australia that's doing well apart from
their figures are way
behind. So of course, sorry. It's hours to go yet.
But the overarching thing is, and this is why we're still sitting here at this time, and why neither the Prime Minister nor the Leader of the Opposition has yet addressed either, is that there's 30% of votes that are pre-poll and postal. So that in an election that is this close, where you've got that many seats that sit with, in a very small margin, these things are going to have an enormous impact on the outcome. Now, in New South Wales, the Labor Party did not put in one seat, I understand, postal vote applications into any of those seats. Not one. Now, most of the seats, a lot of the key seats we're talking about here, seats like Lindsay and so on, are in New South Wales. So this will go out over a number of days, but this is the basis of, my relative confidence on a night like tonight that getting to 76, I think, is very much and completely within the grasp of the government, and that we would be able to give those assurances to the Governor-General, and then we would move forward.
Understanding all that, but you emerge into a more difficult situation than the one you just left.
Well, politics is always difficult.
But that's the point, isn't it? That's the point, isn't it? Though? Let's. I mean, there is still too much that's on the table, I think, to call it tonight. But let's assume, for the purposes of hypotheticals, I rarely do that, but just for this point, you're right. Exactly, it's late. I'm throwing caution to the wind.
Thinking about that plane.
76 seats. You are going to have a Senate which is more difficult than the one that you got. You sought to dissolve, and you're going to have every vote in your somewhat fractious coalition being required to maintain government. That is not stable government.
Well, look, 76 seats. I have no qualms about the fact of maintaining the confidence of the position with 76 plus. Because for seats like Herbert, for example, I don't think in any way can be put in the Labor's column tonight. And I've been getting some texts from you and to exactly that effect in terms of the sheer scale of votes yet to be counted. So we remain confident about those things. And just think about the Senate. Now, we don't know what's happened in the Senate yet, and Anthony's right. There's a lot more votes to count in the Senate. Let's not forget, in the Senate there were 8 moving parts that all had to align into 6 to pass any legislation. And if you could find a common thread between those 8 Senate... Well, I did actually, and I passed the legislation, as did Matthias.
And when the Liberal Party
and when the Labor Party didn't support legislation, we would deal with the Greens or we would deal with the crossbenchers. But it was still 8 moving parts on the crossbench. Now, it's not clear yet that there will be 8 separate moving parts.
Not at the start.
Not clear.
Not at the start, but at the end there will be.
Well, your predictive capabilities are far greater than mine, Chris.
No, just thinking with one of the things I always think with something like a Nick Xenophon team with no ideological glue to hold them together, over the course of events.
Well, I don't know what the Senate result will be in South Australia or on how many seats Nick Xenophon might get, but groups like Nick's, for example, I think there will be an even greater responsibility on those groups which hold more than potentially one Senate vote to actually provide a negotiating bloc in the Senate. Now, currently there is no negotiating bloc in the Senate other than the Greens.
What is Nick Xenophon? This election trying to tidy up the Senate? Sorry to override you. You went to this election trying to tidy up the Senate. Instead of one Jackie Lambie, now you're looking at having 2. It's an even more exotic disarray.
Well, I don't think we know that, Annabelle, to be honest. I don't think we know that it is. Well, how more exotic it is, I'll leave colourful writers like you to describe. But how many moving parts there are and how difficult it is to negotiate things through, well, who knows? But there was to be an election this year. If we weren't having the election today, we would have been having it within just a couple of months anyway.
Yeah, but
and
you
it's
chose
clearly
to go to a
tight
double dissolution,
election.
which halved the quota, which meant you were more likely to get a Senate that was more diverse. I mean, and all for a bill that probably
was very important to us.
Well, it may have been, but you didn't talk about it much during the campaign. And if that was the rationale for re-election, I don't remember hearing that as the key agenda from the Prime Minister.
I'll send you my transcripts,
But
Penny. You'll read over them carefully on the plane on the way
I've
home.
read some of them. I just stopped reading them.
What's Nick Xenophon like to negotiate with?
I find Nick a fairly transactional fellow when it comes to things, and a professional guy. We don't always agree on some things, but on other things you can. You can deal with him professionally, and I have on a number of occasions, and found him good to deal with from that point of view. That doesn't mean you can always get something through with him. But the problem we got to in the end is Nick was one vote of 8, and you'd say, well, stay there, you get 3 or 4 of them together, you'd move over here to get the other 2, and then all the others had moved, which made the Senate completely unworkable.
With respect, you also spend a lot of time, some of your people spend a lot of time, getting stuck into them. Like, you've talked about Jackie Lambie. Now, there are policies that Jackie has I don't agree with, but, you have to negotiate with her in good faith, and you have your people basically having a crack at her from the other side of the Senate day after day. And then asking, it's unsurprising. It's unsurprising she doesn't often give you her vote.
Just on Nick Xenophon, Penny, you're from South Australia and
Dealt with Nick
had
many
plenty
times.
of opportunity
That's
to
right.
observe him not only on the federal level but on a state level, right? And he held the balance of power in the state parliament for some time, and of course he did get a running mate re-elected at one point to the state
That didn't
upper
go so
house.
well.
Right, so that's what I want to know is this guy capable of being a team operator? He was on no speakies with his running mate Anne Bressington by the end of that term.
Who had some very unusual views about fluoride and vaccinations and so forth. And yes, as I understand the relationship, the professional relationship broke down. Well, I think it remains to be seen how he handles his colleagues. I mean, I think Nick is ultimately, he's an ex-Liberal. I think so is Rebecca Sharkey. So, I would say he's he's closer to that side of politics than ours, but he goes where he thinks things are most popular. So I don't agree with him when he says, we're from the centre. I think he goes where he thinks things are popular.
Opinion is.
Correct.
Do you think that, Scott?
I find Nick transactional in politics is probably a good way to put it, and he'll look at a piece of legislation and he'll work through it. I mean, I was able to convince Nick to support us on the reintroduction of temporary protection visas because he understood that we had taken a very clear position on that issue to successive elections and been successful.
Let's run through a few more seats. We might have a look at some where there are retiring members. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go first, Anthony, to the seat of Mackellar. Bronwyn Bishop held it for a very long time and then she was forced from the seat. How has it fared without her?
It's very, very, very large. Bronwyn was elected at the last redistribution, double dissolution in 1987 and departs at this one. Jason Falinski has easily helped retain that seat for the Liberal Party, former president of the New South Wales Young Liberals. He's been in Liberal Party politics for a long time, although he's been out in business for a couple of years. But that's a Liberal retain, and Jason Falinski is comfortably elected as the new member for Mackellar.
All right, let's go to the seat of Barara, also in New South Wales, the north of Sydney. And Philip Ruddock, well, he had the wood on Bronwyn Bishop. He was there since 1973.
Yes, the second longest serving in this term. He passed Earl Page, but he couldn't make Billy Hughes. I don't think anyone will ever catch Billy Hughes. But Julian Leeser, 57.4%, has easily retained Barara. And I think, from memory, Julian would become the first Jewish member elected from New South Wales to the House of Representatives, which was thought of as being, people thought was useful. But he's done a lot of work in the area. He's been involved in the party up there, and he's had Philip Ruddock out campaigning for him in that electorate. And a big success for Julian.
To Victoria and the seat of Goldstein, and Andrew Robb was replaced in this by Tim Wilson, who's a Human Rights Commissioner, and in the IPA before that.
Yeah, and this is a significant addition to the party caucus. Tim Wilson has easily retained this seat. It's a safe seat. Andrew Robb retiring there. And Tim Wilson, 62.2%. He's got a small swing in his favour. As I said, a very safe seat. And Tim Wilson is the new member for Goldstein and is in the Parliament.
All right, go to the seat of Dunkley. This was one the Liberals were worried about because the retiring member Bruce Bilson was so popular. How has his replacement fared?
Yeah, look, someone was pointing out to me a couple of things about these numbers. That Chris Cruther's well ahead, down 41.6. He's 7% ahead, about 7% ahead on first preferences. And on the actual preference count, Labor is ahead. But on the polling figures we've got, we're projecting that the Liberals will win with 51 on the figures to come. So that is still close. Our projection is it will be a Liberal retain, but at the end of tonight, that is going to suddenly look closer when we remove all our projections out of the system. I think, given you get a lot of... it's one of those elections where the absent vote will help the Liberal Party, given the southern end of the electorate and where it is.
There's a very strong endorsement also from Bruce Bilson down there with Chris. I mean, I was down there. I mean, everyone was down there. That was a very tightly contested seat, that one, and for Chris to get, I think, get up there in that contest is a very good result for Victoria and for him.
I know you did it a little earlier, but it was a while ago. You're looking at what happens with pre-poll and postals, and we've got absentee votes and all the rest of it. So if you would go through now for us, so you're sitting on, we've given you 74 seats. Obviously, the magic number is 76. So, if you could give us your kind of best case scenario of where you head from here over the next few weeks, I would say.
Well, look, I see us still completely in the seats of Herbert, Lindsay, Hindmarsh, Capricornia, Ford, Petrie and Cowan, in all of those seats. And they are all seats that the Liberal Party and the LNP and the National Party LNP in Queensland can retain. And that would put us in a clear majority government position.
Like that.
No, it would be a little less than that. It would be about 77 or 78 thereabouts. But, I mean, all of those seats... depending on how some of them have been calculated. I mean, for example, Lindsay is being calculated and Herbert is being calculated currently into the ABC's projections as putting in the Labor column. And I mean, there's some 11,000 postal votes in Herbert. And so we'd be feeling very confident about that position, as we would in places like Lindsay, where we've run a very, very effective pre-poll and postal vote campaign. So the other thing is, I don't know how Labor counts to 75 with the crossbench. I don't know how they get to 75 or 76. So I don't see coming out of tonight any prospect either, certainly of a Labor majority government. I don't even see a prospect of a Labor minority government tonight. I don't see how either of those actually add up.
Do you concede that, Penny Wong?
Oh, look, certainly there are more Liberal seats that you could put in the Liberal column at this point of the night. But, I just think there are so many seats where you've got in doubt, where it's too close to call. I just think tonight it's, yes, I agree. I'd concede this. I'd concede that you can pick more Liberal seats which you'd put into their column now. But I think there's, as I said earlier, there's enough on the table that you'd still say it's all too close to call.
How much power do you have in the shadow cabinet, and can you get Bill Shorten to hurry up?
I think the Prime Minister's going to go for it.
I don't reckon that's something I'd even try.
Scott Morrison, with the benefit of hindsight, is it a fact that Malcolm Turnbull should have gone to a pretty rapid election after he ousted Tony Abbott?
No, I don't believe so. I think it has always been important in this year, particularly given the uncertainty, that we put our plan out there to the Australian people, which is what we did in the budget. Had we not done that, I mean, we've just seen what Labor have done, running a scare campaign on something that didn't even exist. Could you imagine what they would have done if we hadn't gone to a budget and actually set out what our agenda was before this election? They would have accused us of space missions to Mars or something.
Nonetheless, he had an approval rating of about 70% or something at the time.
Look, and this election campaign has proved it once again. If you want a massive, big, hairy scare campaign telling people lies, well, the Labor Party knows how to do it. And they know how to boast about it too.
Oh, come on.
You've got a bit of a
Seriously,
problem here in an ongoing...
Did anyone notice the 2013 election and Whyalla being wiped off the map and $100 roast, or everything you've said, you know, in relation to, what was it, the Labor Green Alliance book that you put out, you know, with little scary green blotches and stuff like that. I mean, you can
you're
give me a
telling me
lecture
if
on
you
scare.
had
Don't give me a lecture on scare
if you had a few more
Really?
seats tonight, you're telling me you'd be knocking back the Greens forming an alliance
Look,
government with Labor.
I just think
Come on.
the Treasurer of the country telling us, you know, that we're running scare campaigns after he puts out his little green book is just a little bit ridiculous.
Let me go. Can I just go? Sorry, can I go over to Anthony for a second?
Anthony's
I've
gonna
got
say
3
something.
points to make. I think the decision not to go early and to wait off for this double dissolution might go down as listed with Kevin Rudd not going at the start of 2010 as perhaps a missed opportunity. I think there's some comparison there. Second thing, the budget hasn't passed and it must pass through the new Senate, which is elected tonight. And so I would expect that there'll be a lot of trying to maximise the pressure in the Senate and with the government. But the third thing I'd also say, in 2010, that hung Parliament was clear on the Sunday night what the numbers were in that Parliament. We knew what the numbers were. It was a matter of negotiation from that point. On the numbers, I'm just looking at some numbers here. We've got lots of projections tonight. There are a lot of seats which are much closer when you look at the raw numbers. Chisholm and Dunkley don't look nearly as good for the government if you just look at the raw numbers, and Herbert is obviously more in doubt. What we got out of tonight is we don't know what the results in those seats are. They will require counting, and it is going to take days to do that. And for Scott's point about the postal votes is very important, is that if the Liberal Party have been doing much better with the postal votes because they've done that organisation, then that may yet pay impact. So this is different from 2010. We don't know the numbers at the end of the night, and it's going to take time to do that count. There'll be a lot of pressure on the Electoral Commission to try and speed things up, and it's going to be a lot of talk over the next few days.
Vote dropped in Petrie might prove to be very important, so I hope they found it.
Well, I've just got some feedback which says the Commission is saying, that's the Electoral Commission, is saying that there will be a large number of pre-polls coming in the next hour or so.
Yeah.
So that's,
let's stick
right.
around.
Hang on.
Thanks, Scott.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
I'm really glad you said
While
that.
we're doing that, why don't we go through and have a look at some of the big swings that we have seen across the country. And we'll go first to Victoria, and there was an interesting contest there which was between the Labor Party and the National Party, and that's the seat of Murray, and Sharman Stone was retiring from that seat, which set up that contest.
We've included this. This is a nice gain for the National Party with Damien Drum elected. In terms of swing, because this is like from compared to the Liberal vote at the last election, this time it's a contest against the Nationals, and you get this enormous swing. But that's just simply because it's a contest between the Nationals and the Liberals this time, rather than the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. So Damien Drum transfers from the Victorian Legislative Council to serve in the House of Representatives.
All right, to the seat of Wills, and it is the Greens' intention that they will stake these seats out over time, and we did see a big swing towards the Greens in this seat this evening.
Yes, we certainly have, and if you look at the first preferences there, the advantage for the Labor Party is they're ahead and they're getting Liberal Party preferences, and I think some of the other minor parties are also directing to Labor out of annoyance at the Senate reform. So Peter Khalil will win that seat at this stage. We're seeing a 12% swing. We do have there's some more votes to come, but I think at this stage you could call that for Peter Khalil.
Now, the Greens were most hopeful in the seat of Batman in Victoria. David Feeney there did not have a great campaign, but it looks like he has run it and won it.
Well, it's actually moved back into the doubtful category because the later figures have actually narrowed the lead. 36.9 to 36. Again, this is a projection we're looking at. We're comparing with the votes in the same counting centres last time. A lot of our work here is based upon that. And he's got the Labor Party ahead 50.3 to 49.7. So clearly I've got the suspicion there the Liberal preferences have drifted a little bit more than normal in that electorate because that doesn't look like the result you'd see if Labor was getting 70% of preferences.
Well, let's go across to South Australia and the Adelaide Hills and the seat of Mayo, where everyone expected that if there was going to be a seat under threat from the Nick Xenophon team, it would be this one.
Yeah, and Jamie Briggs has lost that seat. It's Rebecca Sharkey will be the new member for Mayo, a gain for the Nick Xenophon team. The Nick Xenophon team overall haven't done nearly as well as I expected. They've only got about 20% in the lower house. They look like they've clearly got above 3 in the upper house, but not quite 4. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But certainly 18.2% swing at this stage, and Rebecca Sharkey has won that seat.
All right, we'll stay in South Australia in the seat of Grey, which takes up most of that state.
Really interesting This is an interesting seat, I reckon.
I
Big swing
have
against the
put in an estimate of preferences in this electorate at the moment, and I have Rowan Ramsey ahead. The preference count in this electorate is between the Liberals and the Labor Party. I've factored in 70% of Labor's preferences to the Xenophon candidate, and of course they had open tickets. I expect there will be relatively strong flows of preferences. I think Rowan Ramsey is ahead, but that entire count has to be redone with Xenophon, with Andrea Broadfoot as the alternative to the Liberal Party.
You're assuming a proportion of Labor voters, a reasonable proportion of Labor voters will go to the Libs rather than the Nick Xenophon team. You know, that's an assumption.
All right, well, let's whip up to the western suburbs of Sydney and the seat of Macarthur, and this was one that always was on the Labor Party's radar.
Yep, so Macarthur is Mike Freelander at 36,230. He's a clear victory for the Labor Party in this seat. It sort of reflects the result in Campbelltown at the state election last year, actually returned back to the Labor of an area which seemed to drift away there for a couple of years. Mike Freelander has defeated Russell Matheson, who's a former mayor of Campbelltown. Mike Freelander's a paediatrician in the local area, and he's clearly won that seat. It's a big victory for him.
All right, now to Tasmania, where the night, where one of the great stories of the night for the Labor Party was the fall of all three of the Liberal seats there to Bass.
Yes, well, this is like a repeat of 2004 when the Liberal Party gained seats and then lost them at the next election. Tasmania has the strongest history of being a Labor state over the decades, and it seems to have come roaring back at this election somewhat unexpectedly. That's an enormous 10.6% swing, and I just repeat this actually. There's only been one member for Bass elected at re-elected at the last 8 elections. This is not a seat you want if you want a long career in politics, because there's only one member in the last 20 years been re-elected in this seat. They seem to elect you on one election, they turf you out. Although I will say this: 2 of the former members are now in the state parliament, so maybe that's where Nick will go. So Ross Hart is a new member for Bass.
A lot of representation in Tasmania, so there's always other opportunity, I guess. We'll go to Western Australia in the seat of Burt, a new seat created recent of this election.
Yes, another one of those seats. Clearly the Labor Party's put a lot of groundwork in with the by-election last year. It is a seat which, because of the old electoral boundaries, they hadn't put a lot of effort into, and recently they have put the effort in. They picked a candidate who was known from the by-election, and the reward they've reaped is a 13.8% swing, and that seat has been won by the Labor Party. I think, from memory, the Liberal Party also had a bit of fun and games with first choosing one candidate and then changing their candidate. So Matt Keogh has been elected there. I'll just say one other thing, Dennis Jensen was easily defeated in Tangney as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. Now, we think that Bill Shorten is about to arrive, because you can often tell because the photographers at this thing, I'm thinking, what are they called?
You can't even remember the word for simple things.
The snappers.
Quick, what's this?
It's a house. The snappers all got excited and lifted their cameras, and so we thought something was going to happen. I think it's Brendan O'Connor who looks like he's speaking there, if my eyesight is not failing me. So why don't we have a listen in? He might be introducing Bill Shorten, perhaps.
Volunteers and all the party members and all the unionists and all the Labor supporters across the country. We're going to go to bed tonight. We're going to bed tonight not knowing who's going to form government, but we will be going to bed tonight knowing that Malcolm Turnbull has failed miserably. He was there for one reason, and that was, of course, to deliver votes to the Liberal Party in great numbers. Well, let me just say this. 3 years ago, we were a divided party. We'd just been beaten significantly in the polls, and people were talking about us being in the wilderness and bereft of policies and disunited. And I have to say, in that short time, we have seen cohesion, a unity of purpose, and a focus on policies, and that has been as a result, of course, of the collective efforts of the Labor movement, the Labor Party, the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, but in particular, it's been as a result of the leadership of Bill Shorten. years ago, they said we wouldn't be back. 3 years ago, they said we wouldn't have policies, we wouldn't be brave enough to announce them, lead on the policy debate, fight this on Labor terms with Labor values, but they were wrong. Bill Shorten, as Labor leader, has united the party, has led on policy and has out-campaigned Malcolm Turnbull. I have the great pleasure of introducing the leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, Bill Shorten. Friends, we will not know the outcome of this election tonight. Indeed, we may not know it for some days to come. But there is one thing for sure. The Labor Party is back. And all of you, every single one of you, and thousands of our supporters and members right across this marvellous country, you should have great pride in what we have accomplished. In the past 3 years, we have united as a party. In the past 8 weeks, we have run a magnificent campaign. We have argued for our positive plans, and 3 years after the Liberals came to power in a landslide, they have lost their mandate. And Mr. Turnbull's economic program, such as it was, has been rejected by the people of Australia. Whatever happens next week, Mr. Turnbull will never be able to claim that the people of Australia have adopted his ideological agenda. He will never again be able to promise the stability which he has completely failed to deliver tonight. Friends, whatever happens next week, whether we are in government or in opposition, the Labor Party is re-energised, it is unified, and it is more determined than ever
And we promise the Australian people that from government or indeed opposition, we will save Medicare. Every single member of the Labor Party and every supporter of our cause should be happy and proud and ready to keep fighting for the things that we believe in. I would not swap a single day of the last 3 years, and I would not swap a single person who I fought alongside. We are a great team in Labor. There are so many people to thank, but I wish in particular to acknowledge my friend and my deputy leader, Tanya Plibersek. She's all class and all heart. And I would also like to thank my leadership group in the Senate, Senator Penny Wong and Senator Stephen Conroy. Indeed, my leadership group, including Chris Bowen, Tony Burke and Jenny Macklin, my whole shadow cabinet. Caucus colleagues, branch members, staff and volunteers. And of course, I wish to thank you, the mighty trade union movement of Australia. I thank you all for your energy, your loyalty, your solidarity, your hard work. And I also want to thank, amongst my many key advisors, I wish to acknowledge our National Secretary, George Wright, the Campaign Director. And I do have some very key advisors. They know who they are, but I know that my success is their success. Thank you very much to the team who've been travelling with me. And of course, the Bill bus. I love that. But on a more serious note, I think I speak for all of us who are in politics. No one in public life can serve in politics without the love and support of our families. Chloe, wherever you went in this campaign, you brought the sunshine with you. And I guess the secret is out. You all know how lucky I am. And to my children, Rupert, Georgette and Clementine, you mean everything to me. Thank you for the last 2 months in particular. But friends, happy and as proud as we should be tonight, it is not about us. Tonight is about the Australian people. Their lives, their futures, the country that they want to live in, the dreams they have for them and their families. And after the longest campaign in 50 years, it is time for our Parliament to get back to work. Millions of Australians have voted for Labor, expecting us to do just that. Labor ran for government as a strong and united team. We ran as the party with the most comprehensive policy agenda for this election and the plan to pay for it. And tonight we stand by our program, our mandate. Jobs with fair pay and penalty rates. Education and Gonski. Fibre NBN. Affordable housing and reform of negative gearing. Real action on climate change. And protecting our great national institution, And one of the greatest Labor achievements, Medicare. I promise Australians that the Labor Party I lead will endeavour to find common ground with people of goodwill in the 45th Parliament. People have been elected to serve their communities and are intent upon doing this. In that spirit, I wish to congratulate every member from all the parties and those independent of party, those who have been newly elected tonight. And equally, I offer my commiserations to those who have lost their seats. Being called to serve your country in the Parliament for any period of time is a rare honour and privilege indeed. And I thank the people of Maribyrnong for entrusting me with that great responsibility on a fourth occasion. My fellow Australians, we live in a remarkable and gifted country. We are a generous and diverse nation, energised by the compassion and courage of all who call it home. At this election, Labor has shown it's the party of all Australians, from every generation and in every part of our nation, in our cities, in our regions, from the great grand country towns to new and growing suburbs, battlers and small business people, our farmers and our teachers. We are the party for First Australians and all those who've followed from every faith and every nation and every tradition. We are the party for people who love each other and deserve the right to get married. We are the party for women seeking equal opportunity at work and apprentices looking for a start and older workers looking for a new start. We are the party that includes every citizen of the great Australian aspiration for the fair go all round. And we are the party for the people whose voices all too often go unheard. And I, in particular tonight, I say to all those Australians who feel marginalised and forgotten, alienated and excluded, and to all those Australians who feel that politics as usual simply doesn't work for them, Labor will not leave you behind. We will not let you down. Friends, we are the party for all those who serve, all who strive, all who care for one another, all who make our country what it is. Your futures and your opportunities. This will always be our mission. Together there is nothing that we cannot achieve. Together we will build a better country for all Australians. Thank you very much for your support and hard work.
Bill Shorten there, wrapping up his speech to the Labor Party faithful tonight. I think it's fair to say a very triumphant sounding Bill Shorten, very pleased with the performance that he has taken the party to tonight. To summarise, he said that the Labor Party is back, it is re-energised, unified, more determined than ever. He thanked the key members of his leadership team and he thanked the mighty trade union movement of Australia, and he highlighted some of the policy areas of focus for the Labor Party going into the next Parliament: the Gonski education funding, climate change and preserving penalty rights among them. He's pretty happy, Penny, isn't he?
Well, you know, he should be, and he is, and we are, and Bill's run a great campaign. His office has done a great job. George Wright at campaign headquarters and all the workers have done a great job. But can I also, while we're still here, just shout out to the so many volunteers that the Labor Party relies on. Thank you for all your work and all your support. You've done an amazing job and we're back. Thank you.
Chris, what leapt out to you in that speech?
Oh, it reminds me again so much of 2010. It was when the two different speeches that we had were one from Tony Abbott, who at that stage, you know, had He'd done slightly better in terms of seats, but still hadn't won government. He was upbeat and enthusiastic, and then we had the very downbeat speech from Julia Gillard, and we find ourselves in similar circumstances 6 years on. So I find that astounding. So I think he's got every right to be happy, and I think I'll be very interested to see the demeanour of the Prime Minister. But I'm sure he'll try and be on the balls of his feet and look like he's living in the most exciting... He can't say this. He is living in the most exciting times that he's had for a while, and he's going to have a lot more exciting time.
Oh, it's getting very
over the next 3 years.
It, really
it might not be the kind of excitement you want, but he's going to get it.
What did you think about Bill Shorten's speech?
Well, I agree with all of that. I think he had the upbeat delivery of a person who's done better than people were expecting, rather than the downbeat one of somebody who's thinking that the next few days could be quite tricky.
He's pointed out a few times in the campaign in recent days, Bill Shorten, that people have perhaps underestimated him.
He's certainly had a better time in the last 8 weeks than almost anybody else in Australia. He enjoys campaigning. I think he regards this 8-week campaign as his reward for 3 years of slogging away, whereas I suspect, Malcolm Turnbull kind of looked at it as an obligatory stage to get through before getting back to the entirely delightful business of being Prime Minister. But the other thing that interests me about Bill Shorten's speech is, particularly when it lapsed into sort of free-form poetry for that end bit, is that he seemed to be sort of making an appeal to all sorts of different groups, and he mentioned the importance of finding common ground for people of goodwill in the 45th Parliament, which I guess gives you an idea of what he might be spending the next little while doing, finding and building relationships with those people of goodwill wherever they bob up in the 45th Parliament. Everyone's going to be trying to make friends with those people of goodwill, I think.
Why don't we have a little look, while we wait for Malcolm Turnbull to arrive, let's have a look at some of the seats that are still in doubt, maybe. Sorry.
I'm getting stuff through from Western Australia, and that's showing that in Cowan, the pre-poll was breaking 57.8% the coalition's way. Now, I think once we start, this is a point I've been making all night, with 30% of the vote still to come, with the coalition on the cusp of actually being able to form a majority government, with the Labor Party tonight, who have had the second lowest primary vote they've had. I mean, the only person who had a lower primary vote than Bill Shorten tonight was Kevin Rudd. So, I mean, he's given his rally speech.
You do agree you've lost seats?
I'm not disputing that.
Okay,
I'm not disputing
so we're clear about
but
that.
we're also on the cusp of being able to ensure that we're returned as a government. The Labor Party is not in a position to do that either in minority or in majority. And on top of that, they have had the second worst primary result in about 100 years. So they will have their cheers tonight. But there is still a lot of votes to count, and there's, I think, a very serious process now as we go into the next couple of days, which will see, as I said, seats like Herbert, seats like Lindsay, seats like Cowan, seats like Petrie. All of these, I think, continue and improve for the government and put us in a position to be able to get back on with the job, which is what we put to the Australian people that we were seeking to do.
I just want to make one comment about pre-poll, which is, unlike postals, where it's true, I think the demographic and historically has favoured the coalition more.
Could you just explain for the audience what the difference is? Because I suspect we're going to be talking about this for a few...
So postal votes where people, they might be older or not able to come to a polling booth, so they write in, they say, I want a postal vote sent to me, basically. At pre-poll, you just rock up to the pre-poll centre and you can vote ahead of the day, although you're supposed to only do that if you can't attend on polling day. We've had a... pre-poll has been growing over these last two elections. I would suspect what you'll see is pre-poll probably more following where the polling, where voter intention was at that time. So if the polling was better for Labor or worse for Labor at a particular point in that campaign, in that week, I think you'll probably see that reflected in the pre-poll. So I don't know that you can make a broad assertion that all pre-poll will favour the coalition. I think it will probably track more closely where the campaigns were trending at that time.
Well, I'd be arguing it's going to, and based on our evidence, that it will be trending towards us in the seats that matter and in incumbent seats that matter. People who pre-poll know what they want to do. They're not. It's polling day. I've got to go and vote today. They are going out there and making sure they're doing that before polling day. And postals are very similar. See, what happens at the start of a campaign, as an incumbent member, you'll write to everyone in your electorate and you say, are you going to be there on that day? And if you're not, can we help you with a postal vote? And they will write back to us. We'll send them a how to vote card. So these are people saying, I want to vote for you, so how can I help? How can we help you do that? And there is a large number of votes in this pool, and all the seats we're now focusing on are incumbent Liberal seats, but certainly there's Chisholm, and there's some interesting things going on in Melbourne Ports and Batman and so on, but the ones that are actually going to decide whether government is formed is going to fall to those seats, and that gives us, I think, quite a reason for confidence at this late hour.
Hopefully we will have some sort of idea of that within a half hour, given that your information was that the Australian Electoral Commission around about half an hour ago or so said that in an hour's time we might get a whole bunch of these.
Wasn't that yesterday?
Well, it's saying that those figures from Cowan are just coming through. I mean, 57.8.
What's going to happen tonight if we keep going is everyone's going to start to get delirious.
I think some of us
We're already all on the edge.
We are now 6 hours into this broadcast. It's going to start getting into David.
Annabelle, get us cooking in a sec.
Sure, I'll bring in a fry pan. We'll have a good old fry.
I'm in that.
I want to ask, just because we've got time, there's just no evidence that the Prime Minister is ever going to appear, or indeed who the...
Yes, Scott, let me ask you, how much influence do you have? Can you get Malcolm Turnbull to hurry
Before you do that, and given we have this lull, I know there are some still people down at the Tarrant Point Bowling Club tonight, down in the seat of Cook, and I just want to thank all of them for hanging around tonight.
I hope you're not waiting for you to show up.
No, I've sent them a text through to Jenny that it's unlikely I'm going to be able to turn up.
Yeah.
But I want to thank all of them, and to Meredith and Louise and Scott and the whole campaign team that are down there in Cook. We had a good result in Cook today. The Shire is secure, and St George, and those that come in, not only just a Sharks win tonight, but I want to thank...
Secure sounds like a Hobbit movie.
I want to thank all of our volunteers as well, and right across the state and right across the country. Thank you also. You've done a great job for a cause you believe in.
I would like to order a pizza. Can I proceed with my question?
Yes.
Just because I've been busted.
Yes, you may.
Listen, since we are now in a state of uncertainty, everybody's very tired, it's been an 8-week campaign, and not one with a terribly clear conclusion at this point. What does all of this disturbance mean for the prospects of Australia going back to the polls before the end of the year to vote on a plebiscite? A serious question. Scott Morrison?
Come on, just tap the mat.
It's frankly not something.
Parliament, Scott,
right now,
really.
it's the furthest thing from my mind, and I think it's the furthest thing from most Australians' mind.
To see what your mind thinks about it.
Right now, I'm looking at these seats like Cowan and others, and the prospect of us being returned as a government, and then we'll get on with exactly what we said we would do on that issue, and that will be determined also by the Australian people, some at either later this year, which is the goal, and I'll let them make that decision. I'm not about to impose my view on them or anyone else.
Let's hold that thought. I'm being told that Malcolm Turnbull has just left his house in Point Piper on the way to the Wentworth Hotel, so... Assuming there's no roadworks, that's about 10 minutes away.
How long is it?
I'm going to give a quick, shout out to Jenny and the girls too. Thank you very much, Jenny. I showed Annabelle the cupcakes that you made for the Lily Pilly Fate today. She was really impressed.
He did too. They're excellent. All right, let's go to Greg Jennett.
I better say thank you, Sophie. Thank you.
I would still like that pizza.
Can we go to Greg Jennett?
People are getting delirious.
Oh, we are getting delirious. Greg Jennett at the Wentworth Hotel. What's going on down there?
I'll let you interrupt your delirium just for a moment, just to reconfirm what you said, Lee. The member for Wentworth has left his electorate and is inbound towards the Wentworth Hotel where we are, and that might provide another punctuation point in the gloomiest of nights for Liberal supporters here. It's only been interrupted, that gloom, twice, and that was, ironically enough, by Bill Shorten. So what they did in the ballroom here was pump up the broadcast by the ABC, we could note, and put it on the big screens with some volume up for the first time in the evening, and it was largely met with silence until Bill Shorten unleashed his rallying cry about Save Medicare. That got the boos and hisses going, and then a reference to the strength of the union movement, which really set them off. So they're looking for any stimulation they can find here on what has been a totally unexpected night for all concerned. They came here thinking this was a celebration, maybe to even rival that which some had been here for 3 years ago, which was Tony Abbott's victory night celebration. Instead, uncertainty, a prolonged wait. I suppose if we run a clock over the drive time from Point Piper to here, it's possible that Malcolm Turnbull might pull up in, let's say, a minute to midnight. But this one will roll well over into tomorrow at least.
Annabelle Crabb just pointed out, given his propensity for public transport, he might be on the bus. I certainly
Malcolm, get in the cab.
I certainly
They
hope
have some
not.
circuitous routes in that electorate.
They certainly do. What's his favourite? The 371 or whatever?
I was just googling that because I'm
What time is the 371 clock off? Because he might be out there at the bus stop thinking, when's that thing coming?
The 311 stopped running.
Maybe you and I need to start
All
fighting
right, look, I think
again.
I've been told by a higher power that we should have a look at some of the seats that are in doubt while we wait for the Prime Minister to perhaps alleviate us of some of the doubt. Now, Capricornia we have been talking about all evening. It is a seat that is basically Labor in its heart, goes occasionally to the LNP, usually only held for a term. So if Michelle Landry holds it, that would be an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, and at this stage, it's a real nip and tuck affair. The Labor Party's just ahead on first preference votes, but there is quite a significant vote for Conservative independents there, not for Greens, and that's assisting the LNP to hold that seat. And at this stage, we're projecting Michelle Landry on 50.2, and so she's just ahead, got a nose in ahead at the moment. I haven't actually looked at the actual count, that is projection forward. So that's an encouraging figure for her at this stage, but that seat remains in doubt.
All right, let's click all the way across to the other side of the country in the seat of Cowan. Luke Simpkins there. Of course, he famously was the one who moved the motion of no confidence in Tony Abbott.
And at this stage, Luke Simpkins is ahead, just only slightly ahead on first preferences. There's a vote for the Greens. Again, this is an electorate with quite a disparate collection of polling places. There's obviously some pre-polls and the like to come. It's got the Liberals on 50.1% as a projection at this stage. So that seat is another which is definitely too close to call at this stage of the night. Just having a look at the raw numbers. On the raw numbers, Anne Alley is ahead. But on the projected figure, Luke Simpkins is ahead. So there's going to be a lot of counting in some of these seats to come.
All right, we're ricocheting from one side of the nation to the other. Well, let's go back to Queensland, the seat of Flynn in central Queensland. How are we doing there?
The LNP is ahead. No, let me look at this. Yes, we're projecting now. Zach Beers is ahead on first preference, a very low first preference vote for both parties, a big vote for One Nation. Now, on the actual count I've got, Zach Beers is ahead by about nearly 2%, but that's projecting towards the LNP winning. I presume that's based on pre-polls, postals, and like projections in the past. But that's quite a shift. At this stage, we're seeing Ken Dowd is leading. I think either way, that seat remains in doubt.
Okay.
So it's the sort of seat that has a big rural postal vote, which always is.
Track down the coastline then and go to the outer southern Brisbane seat of Ford.
Well, this is one of the seats. Ford and Finn have come back into the doubtful category towards the end of the night. Bert Van Manen is just behind on first preferences by about 170 votes, but we're projecting him to be just ahead after when you take account of where the polling places are from. So at this stage, the LNP is ahead and that seat remains in doubt, and that's another one of those. There'll be scrutineers all over on Monday morning.
To the western suburbs of Adelaide now, in the seat of Hindmarsh. Last time around, Steve Georgianis lost this seat. Will Matt Williams lose it back to him this time?
Well, at the moment on the count we've got, this one's got a slow count. There seem to be a few polling places missing in this one. Steve Georgianis is about 370 votes ahead. We're projecting him to still be ahead once we take account where that vote's from. It's 50.3 for the Labor Party. All the numbers we're projecting in terms of overall figures for this election, at the end of tonight when we turn off all our comparisons and stuff, it's going to look a much closer election and a lot more seats in doubt. Because there are seats which on the raw numbers are in doubt. You need to sit down and consider all those postals and absent trends, which is why I was saying this result is in fact much closer and requires more counting than 2010.
All right, now into Victoria, and the seat of Batman had been in the news a lot. David Feeney trying to defend it from the Greens.
and this has become much closer as the night goes. It was very, actually, no, I've got the wrong figures there. Alex Batal is ahead on first preferences, and you would expect from those numbers that David Feeney would go on to win. There's been a 10% swing, which puts it down to 50.3, which looks surprisingly close from those first preferences. It's again one of these, when you get down to this time of night, you really need to go and look at where those last polling places are coming from. At this stage, that remains in doubt.
Thank you very much, Anthony. All right, we're going to go to a summary. We are just shy of midnight on the East Coast, just shy of 10 p.m. in the West. 74% of the vote has been counted, and it's still around a 2.8% swing to the Labor Party, which is the territory it's sort of stuck around all night. I'm going to pass up to Michael Rowland upstairs to give us a recap, but I might have to interrupt you, Michael, if the Prime Minister arrives.
Yes, please feel free to interrupt me, Lee, as we zoom up to the ABC's upper echelons here at Election Central, and we can show you where the state of play is at the moment while we wait for the Prime Minister to arrive at that Sydney hotel. There we see the Coalition on 73 seats, the Labor Party on 66. Greens MP Adam Bantry elected to the seat of Melbourne in Victoria, and 4 on the crossbench. Let's flip those graphics to show you how the primary vote is landing as we pass midnight. 42% of the Coalition, the Labor Party on just shy of 35%, the Greens on 10.2%, and others, Independents, Nick Xenophon's party, and other crossbenchers on 12.9%, which has basically stayed where it's been for most of the night. Let's see now how the primary vote has leapt up and leapt down according to the party over the course of the night, and really not much movement on this front over the last hour or so. Is this voting stasis, really. The Liberal National Party down 3.5% on primary votes, the Labor Party up 1.5%, Greens up 1.5% as well, and others, Independents, up about 0.5%. Once preferences are distributed, we can now extrapolate that out to the two-party preferred, and here we see our wonderful pendulum up here on the balcony of the third floor of the ABC's elections, and a 2.8 swing to the Labor Party, and there you see with those blue and red bar charts just how close it is. 50.7 for the Coalition and 49.3 for the Labor Party. And we can now show you the state of play with our virtual map of Australia, and most, if not all, of these seats have been coloured in over the course of the night. There are still a number of undecided seats, but there you see really even Stevens there, with the Coalition largely ahead. 6 undecided, the Labor Party just shy of 70 seats there as well. While we wait for the Prime Minister, there is one upside, of course, for waiting for the Prime Minister to appear, is that we can actually take you, do around the grounds around this great country of ours, starting in New South Wales, where the Labor Party has done particularly well tonight. The Labor Party up on 24 seats, the Coalition on 23 seats, and the Greens and Independents not cracking it at all in New South Wales. Let's zip down now to the ACT, and absolutely no surprise there. 2 Labor seats before tonight, 2 Labor seats again. Let's move now down to Victoria, where it has been up and down all night. The Coalition is on 17 seats, the Labor Party on 17 seats as well. As I mentioned, Adam Bant, Greens MP, re-elected to his seat of Melbourne, and Cathy McGowan, once again, the member for Indi in the state's north. Let's go down to Tasmania, where the Labor Party has done particularly well, and doing particularly well early in the night. We saw the Labor Party pick up the 3 seats taken off it by the Liberal Party in the 2013 election, as well as holding its seat of Franklin, and the other seat there is represented, of course, by Andrew Wilkie, once again being re-elected as the Hobart-based member for Denison. Let's zip up to South Australia now, and we see one of the big headline results there. The Nick Xenophon team, care of Rebecca Sharkey, knocking off Jamie Briggs in the seat of Mayo. The Greens not cracking into the state. The Coalition on 4 seats, and the Labor Party on 5. Let's go across to the west now, and a mixed picture there for both parties. We have the Coalition on 11 seats, the Labor Party on 4, no action for the Greens or Independents, and that white triangle you see at the very top of Western Australia, it's not geographically correct, but it is the seat of Cowan, held by the Liberal Party MP Luke Simpkins, under challenge from Labor's Anne Alley. Let's take you across to the Northern Territory now. Before tonight, one seat each for the Labor Party and the Country Liberal Party. It is now 2 seats to the Labor Party, the Labor Party taking the seat of Solomon off Natasha Griggs. And let's zip across to Queensland to finish up our look at the nation tonight. And the coalition there is on 18 seats, Labor Party on 8, and good old Bob Katter holding on his seat of Kennedy in the far north of Queensland. Let's finish up with one, possibly the last look at the House of Representatives chamber as those seats are gradually filled over the course of the night, and this is probably the best reflection of all as to how close it'll be, whether Malcolm Turnbull gets to govern in his own right, or whether there is going to be some form of hung parliament minority government after all the final votes are counted. And we can bring up the composition now of the 45th Parliament, a special Canberra-type Mexican wave there. And there we see the Labor Party on the right there on 66, and the Coalition on 73, and 4 crossbenchers and Greens holding that seat at the back with those undecided seats as well. So that is the state of the nation as we speak, as we tick into Sunday. It's back down to you on the panel.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your very good work tonight. Now, we're told that Malcolm Turnbull has pulled up at the Wentworth Hotel and he has alighted from his car and is making his way up to the ballroom. We can see a bit of action happening there at the moment. It looks like it's filled up a little bit, actually, since Greg pointed out earlier the empty patches of carpet. I think he described it as it's certainly filled up there. We know that the former Prime Minister, John Howard, is in the room as well. And all of the snappers are sort of getting their flashes ready and hoping to grab the, money shot of the Prime Minister as he comes in.
Tricky to pick the right tone for a speech in this sort of occasion. I mean, we're now into Sunday.
Well, and as Scott says, they might yet form majority government, so you don't want to sound too down in the dumps, do you?
Well, no, because for that very reason. And there's no... Look, it's been a difficult night. There's no doubt about that. We said at the outset that we expected a swing against us, and there have been quite a number of colleagues we've lost tonight, and I want to thank them for their service to our country, and it'll be a very difficult night for them. But they can take one comfort, that it looks like still that we'll be able to form a majority government in the next few days, however long it takes to count these pre-polls and the postals.
It's the morning, by the way.
Good morning.
Just in case you were wondering.
Well, I'm going to send a good morning down to Michael Suka there in Deakin, who has actually achieved a more than 2% swing to him at this election in Victoria, and that is an extraordinary result on a night like this.
There's some big local issues or something at play down there?
No, his ground game was sensational. I saw it firsthand. Michael has, from the day he was elected, he has really worked it hard, and it's a really great tribute to him and his team down there in Deakin. Well done, Michael.
People, I mean, it's stating the bleeding obvious, but I feel that I can after midnight. The importance of a local candidate who is very well plugged into the community cannot be overstated. The idea that somebody can be just elected as a person who has the branches stacked or whatever doesn't really cut it, particularly when we're seeing the sort of willingness of people to go across to independence. If people stand as independents who are very well connected members of the community, it's,
Look,
which is one of the, sorry.
There you go.
Oh, I was just going to say one of the things that was really pleasing, if I can be parochial for a moment, that we've got some really great South Australian MPs who obviously had a challenge with where Nick Xenophon team was polling. They haven't polled, as Anthony said, as well as they anticipated, but people like Kate Ellis and Nick Champion, Amanda Rishworth, Tony Zapier, they've done a great job. Mark Butler in Port Adelaide, and exactly for the reason you described. I was making some phone calls during the week and in different electorates, and the number of people who would say to me, oh yeah, I really like Amanda, or she's everywhere, or Kate does this and stuff like that. And I think that having a strong local member is critical.
And it's hard work.
Critical.
The other thing too is it's actually
hard work.
people don't understand what hard work this is and how much effort those people who actually are managing to maintain these very tiny margins have to do every single day. They go to every single event, and in the southern states, can I say, through a winter campaign, they genuinely have been experiencing some hardship.
That's true, but on nights like that tonight, sometimes there are things that happen, like has happened in Tasmania, where honestly, it doesn't matter how much work you've done.
And did anyone
they'll
see
get swept away.
honestly? Did either of you? Honestly, did either of you actually see that coming? Like, that would be so comprehensive.
No, I
in
didn't.
Tasmania.
I visited. No, I can't remember how many. 2-3 weeks ago, I think, and I thought it felt pretty good. But you know, I would. This is at the upper end of what your sort of hopes and expectations would be. It's a great result, hasn't it?
What about Penny Wong? How do you feel about, in the end, how Nick Xenophon has gone in South Australia? Where did it land compared to your expectations?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was polling he and his team were polling very high. Labor certainly ran for the first time really, we ran a focused Senate campaign. We've appear to have, I mean, there aren't that many, obviously I haven't counted all of them, but on the initial figures, the first preference above the line, we appear to have done well compared to last time, where obviously Nick polled a lot better than we did. So, and Nick hasn't polled as highly as he was as the earlier polling suggested. Sorry,
did you say you think you've got your view of the figures at this point is that Nick Xenophon's looking like he's got just under 3 quotas?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the AEC first preferences. I don't think Anthony's got any figures on this, so that I've seen, but it certainly looks like there was a swing away from Nick compared to where he was polling earlier in the campaign and compared to last time. And Labor's performed better in our Senate campaign. So that's obviously really pleasing.
Interesting too, there are always races within races, and the National Party is very happy this evening because they've held the seats they've got and they picked up one from you, in fact.
Well, they have, and look, I think the Nationals, particularly Barnaby in New England and Luke Hartziker in Cowper, they were very, very tough races, and Barnaby, he would not yield there to Tony Windsor, and the fact that Tony hasn't got up tonight, I think, is good news, and great to see Barnaby back.
I just saw a couple of Malcolm Turnbull's key advisors walk into the room, David Bold and Tony Parkinson, so the Prime Minister can't be too far away, one would hope.
Speechwriters just sort of think, no, don't say that. Hang on a minute.
Hang on, I need to change that last paragraph.
What is the correct adjective, do you think?
It's hard. It's hard, as you say, because it's difficult to know what to say in these circumstances where it's not quite clear.
There are people that have been elected tonight for us, and some new talent that are coming in. Nicole Flint is coming in the suit of Boothby. That's a great recruitment for us, and to see her get up tonight in a difficult seat, a tight seat, and to prevail. Ben Morton, originally from Wyong and now from the West, getting up over there, and he's coming to the Parliament. Julian Leeser, look, there's a large list of those who've come into a lot of those non-incumbent races, and so that will add, I think, a lot of vigour and passion and depth to the team.
You are relentlessly upbeat, Scott Morrison. You should move into real estate, selling apartments in difficult areas.
Do tourism.
Going back to the point we were making before about strong local members, I must say, and Chris saying about the amount of work people have to do, I must say, hats off to politicians, because the other thing too is you can't on your weekend just sit around somewhere quietly and have a coffee with your mate, because someone's likely to come up and say to you, oh listen, I'm very upset about that pothole and blah blah blah, and you can't say, well, I'm sorry, I'm the federal MP, I don't deal with potholes, it's just
see me for netball court, because I can really help you out. That was a really interesting thing about this campaign, is that obviously the Prime Minister and his team ran for an exciting group of people, not a super exciting sort of general campaign. The messages were very staid, and the artwork was very staid. But there was a lot going on at the local level, wasn't there? I mean, there was...
Well, not just a lot at the local level. I mean, there's some comparisons been made over the course of this campaign with what's been happening globally in the United States and, in comparable democracies in the United Kingdom. There's been a lot of upheaval. And tonight, for us to be in a position where we'd be able to form a government, we believe, in the middle of that sort of tumult, is I think something we can reflect on positively. I mean, there is a lot of change. I mean, Bill mentioned it in his own speech. Bill mentioned it in his own speech.
This has been a resounding rejection of your agenda.
Well, I don't know how that's possible when you. I mean, have a look at the board behind you, Penny, because it says 36 ALP, 42 LNP.
To lose this many seats, what this says is that people didn't agree with your agenda.
Well, no, you can't, Penny. The scoreboard reflects something different because we'd be in a position to form a majority government, and that is called a mandate.
Well, I think everybody knows that we have seen seats going to the Labor Party. This is not the result you thought. You've got a double dissolution election which has ended up with potentially a hung parliament. You won't, even if you could form parliament, get the legislation through that you were talking about. I think the reality is you had a Prime Minister who was extraordinarily popular who now has delivered this result. You've got a party that's divided, and I think an agenda that people didn't respond to. I don't think they responded to the
return a majority of members in the House of Representatives, which is called a winning of an election.
If you don't agree with Penny Wong, Scott, what do you think are the lessons for your side to take from this result?
Well, taking forward change is always hard, and I think in an uncertain world like this, people remain cautious and concerned about change. And this is a big challenge for the country. Now we have two choices. We can recoil from that and pull the doona over our head and hope it all goes away, but we've seen what happens to countries that do that. And so we have taken forward a plan in this election to say we have to move forward. We have to embrace this uncertain world. And that remains our view.
It's not pulling the doona over your head to say that the way to do this is not to hack into Medicare and schools. That's not pulling the doona over your head. That is a different agenda.
Maybe what's pulling the doona over your head is thinking that you can spend more money on all of those things, run up bigger deficits, relying on optimistic assumptions in the PFO. The Secretaries of Treasury and Finance have said that the assumptions are optimistic in the PFO.
With respect, that is to some extent their talking points. I mean, over the 10
it's actually your costings, Penny.
Over the 10 years, the budget is in a better position under us than them. Right? I think that's agreed.
That is relying on some assumptions on the upside.
But if that's
that is
the
a
case,
golden book costing.
If that's
what
the
it is.
case, then you should be saying to them, why is your corporate tax cut unfunded?
It is funded,
because
Penny.
But
it is.
Don't be angry and shouting.
No,
I know it's late.
I'm just want to respond to
you
say it's unfunded, but it is funded.
If just for the moment conceding, which I don't necessarily, but let's just say you're right, then precisely the same uncertainty applies to his budget and his long-term opposition.
Absolutely.
And what I would say to you is, I do not think, and we have been up for difficult savings measures, both in the expenditure side, as well as getting rid of negative gearing.
That's a tax increase.
Well, just hang on a second. These are the excesses that you went weak on because everybody jumped up and down.
Penny.
But you see, it's really hard at this time.
Can you just actually, guys,
finish?
Hold for a second and let me just ask, Auntie, are you getting any new numbers or anything that we might be interested in?
No, I have no particular news numbers. I think there'll be final figures tonight. And,
all right, back to your rowing. Back to your bluing then.
Can I say, I can't wait for the image to see Malcolm Turnbull coming through the looking glass, which we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, it is a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have a question about budgets. Scott Morrison, you now have a bunch of former budgets still kind of hanging around your neck that you've got to try and get through the Parliament. The most recent one...
This was my next point, actually.
Oh, was
Thank
it?
you, yes.
At what point do you just let go of budgets? I mean, when you've got a backlog of some old ones that you haven't been able to get through, when do you give up?
We refashioned measures from the 14 budget in the 15-16 budget, and a good example of that was how we refashioned the changes around the pension, and we actually got that through the Parliament. We refashioned the stuff we did around childcare and the family tax benefit, and that was a result of working things through the Senate. So most of the measures that remain blocked in the Senate are not measures actually from the 14-15 budget. They are actually measures that we listened to the Senate on, sought to refashion, and then we put them back into the Parliament, and you continue to work towards the goal, including the measure...
Do you think you're going to have to refashion the business tax cut? Because it sounded like the Prime Minister was doing that a bit during the course of the campaign.
No, I don't believe we will. I think that's exactly what the country needs, and we are, as I said, on numerous occasions on the cusp of forming a majority government. And a majority government means that you have sought and been given a mandate for the Australian people. That's how the Westminster system works.
I would venture a prediction, even if you form government. I think the chances of you getting a lot of your budget and election measures through are low.
Well,
I just think people do not accept that the tax cuts that you put forward are the most important priority for the nation. On your point that I was trying to respond to, Lee, what I would say to you is that investment in human capital, in people, in education is important for growth. I mean, we can't be a smarter country to compete in a more difficult and challenging globalised world unless we invest more in our people, in apprenticeships, in our schools and in our universities. I just think that is a growth strategy.
But then you made that point earlier about in the 80s where there was a sort of economic reforms coupled with a social compact.
Correct.
If you want to make the spending targets that you've set up and have things like the NDS and like Gonski, you're going to have to do more on the reform side because you're going to need more money over time to do that stuff.
You should look to...
Well, I think that's what we've been looking to, isn't it? I mean, that is why we've been prepared to put some very difficult politically challenging policy measures on the table on the revenue side, and why we've been prepared to pass the appropriate aspects of the government's expenditure cuts. But I don't think you can say to the Australian people, hey, we're going to give this $50 billion tax cut, but we're going to make Medicare more expensive for you. I just don't think... I don't think that is something that resonates. I don't think it's something that's fair.
And it's not something we're doing either, Penny. I mean, the time for sending people those text messages in the middle of the night, you don't have to do them on air. You can...
Actually, I might actually believe this. I know that it might be news to you, but I might actually believe it is not a good thing.
Look, you may believe many things, Penny, but the things you're articulating about our policies are untrue.
There's a moment it's reminding me of one of those sort of fist fights that used to go like in the...
I'm taking a deep breath.
Tonight,
I'm taking a deep breath.
But no, it's a difficult time of night. It's just hit 12:17 a.m. and we are hoping that the Australian Electoral Commission might come good on the promises that it made to you. Two things we hope for. In no particular order. One is that the Prime Minister might work out his speech and we'll hear it.
I was wondering if he might be waiting for the numbers.
I knew I was going to miss the Swans versus Bulldogs. I didn't expect to miss the Tour de France as well.
Sport again. What novels are you reading at the moment?
We're being told to stand by for the Prime Minister. Let's hope that's an accurate reflection of what's about to happen.
Well, I read, Where's Spot?
Yeah, that's right. You do a bit of that sort of stuff. The questions, just to get back to serious matters, the questions that you guys are both having to grapple with, though, as political parties, are only going to get harder as time goes forward, because we've seen the intergenerational report and things of this nature, and leading economists all say it's getting harder and harder. The population is ageing, the challenges are greater, providing healthcare for an older population is difficult. It's not going to get easier, is it?
Well, I don't think the world is getting easier. It's getting more complex, it is getting more uncertain, it is getting more volatile. And the reason that Malcolm and the entire team, myself included, was so focused on issues of growth. I mean, many of the measures that we put in the budget, you wouldn't describe some of them as popular measures, but we would describe them as necessary measures for growth. Now, if you're going to commit to a growth agenda, then you have to commit to the policies that we believe are going to drive that growth. And that's what we put forward in this election. And a majority seats in the House of Representatives means that is something that people were prepared to back. And there is no mandate in opposition. If you're in opposition and you don't have the seats to actually form a government, you've got a mandate for nothing. If you've actually got a majority of seats in the House of Representatives, you have won an election.
Penny Wong.
I think we're going around in circles.
Probably.
I think we're going around in circles.
Why don't we go to Greg Jennett at the Wentworth Hotel, and we can hopefully find out what's going on. He can hear me.
He's
We won't see him.
We're
going to
what's
stay
happening,
on the
right?
shot.
He's going to say he's on his way.
Greg, what's going on?
Yes,
Greg Jennett, can you hear me?
I am here. Yes, I am, Lee. It's my shtick in broadcasting to be the guy who always says something's about to happen. Chris Ullman and I did an awful lot of that, if you remember, 8 weeks ago on what we call calling day. Yeah, and every time I said it, nothing did. But there is reason. There is reason to think, based on the anecdotals, that the Prime Minister won't be too far off now. You've already noted that some of his most senior advisors are already in the room. They came down in an earlier lift, and I just sort of got an indication from one that things can't be too far off. But
can somebody check if Malcolm is stuck in the lift or something?
Yeah, if you put campaign time, there is a margin of error for Prime Ministers. You know, they say they're going to have media conferences at 12:30. It's normally plus or minus 8 to 10 minutes, so don't take my predictions and prognostications with anything approaching seriousness. But look, the mood has lifted a little, Lee, I can tell you that much. If some crowd did go home earlier, the numbers have built a bit in anticipation. It's certainly louder in the room. People are chatting and the drinks are flowing for the Liberal Party invitees, so their spirits are a little higher. I don't know, other than the noise level, how to measure that, but it was really gloomy, as I told you earlier, and I suppose just in anticipation of the Prime Minister's arrival, that at least has a lifting effect on the spirits for those party members who are here.
And is the former Prime Minister John Howard still there, Greg?
So he is still in the hotel, as we understand it, but he's not actually here in the ballroom. So I was noting earlier that it was largely devoid of MPs and front benches. That's still sort of true. Matthias Cormann is here. John Alexander from the seat of Bennelong is here. There aren't too many others. I guess they've all got home electorate responsibilities in their seats around Sydney, so it's not a given that they would flock here under any scenario, win, lose or draw. So Matthias Cormann has taken up a front row seat down by the, well, not a seat, but a standing position down in front of the Prime Minister's podium when he does arrive. And yeah, the member for Bennelong is just nearby, a few metres away as well. Other than that, it really is long-time party members and people who've been out on the booths. A large contingent here from Wentworth, people who were setting up booths at 5 o'clock this morning.
Greg, we're just seeing the Prime Minister now. He's emerged from the lift and is making his way to the stage now. I presume his wife, yes, his wife Lucy is with him. He's heading into the ballroom at the Wentworth. Now, the Wentworth Hotel, of course, having been the venue of choice for the Liberal Party for many an election
Scene of triumph and despair.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there in 2007 when John Howard lost.
Usually pretty sodden by this hour, isn't it?
It is, yes. There's Malcolm Turnbull's son there with him as well, and his son-in-law. He's not getting introduced as Bill Shorten is. He's just taking the podium himself directly.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Now tonight, my friends, I can report that based on the advice I have from the party officials, we can have every confidence that we will form a coalition majority government in the next parliament. It is a very, very close count. It is a very close count, as you know. And right now, nearly 30% of the votes are yet to be counted. The pre-poll will continue to be counted until 2 a.m, but I don't suggest we should wait around for that. And then the Commissioner advises us there will be no more counting tomorrow or on Monday, and they will count the postal votes on Tuesday. And we may, the final result in terms of seats may not be known until then. So we will have to wait a few days. But as my distinguished predecessor, mentor, former boss John Howard well remembers, we've seen this before in 1998, and this is
this is an experience not unknown in the parliamentary history of the Liberal Party. And of course, the really critical thing is this, my friends. The values that we have and the policies that we brought to this election meet the challenges of our times. The Labor Party ran some of the most systematic, well-funded lies ever peddled in Australian politics. We have never, the massed ranks of the union movement and all of their millions of dollars, telling vulnerable Australians that Medicare was going to be privatised or sold, frightening people in their bed, and even today, as voters went to the polls, as you would have seen in the press, there were text messages being sent to thousands of people across Australia saying that Medicare was about to be privatised by the Liberal Party, and the SMS message came from Medicare. It said it came from Medicare. An extraordinary act of dishonesty. No doubt the police will investigate. But this is the scale of the challenge we faced, and regrettably, more than a few people were misled. There's no doubt about that. But the circumstances of Australia cannot be changed by a lying campaign from the Labor Party. The challenges, the fact that we live in times of rapid economic change, of enormous opportunity, enormous challenges, a time when we need to be innovative, when we need to be competitive, when we need to be able to seize those opportunities, those times are there. No politician can give a speech, can write a policy, can send a message and change the reality of the circumstances in which we live and the policies that will enable us to meet those times with success. And they are the values of our parties, because they are the values of freedom, of business, of enterprise and entrepreneurship. And the alternative, the idea that the answer to Australia's economic challenges, as Labor would have it, Labor with the second lowest primary vote in its history, but Labor would say that the answer is more debt, more deficit and higher taxes. Seriously. So, my friends, I'm sure that as the results are refined and come in over the next few days with all of the counting, we will be able to form that majority government. But let me say this without any fear of contradiction. The Labor Party has no capacity in this parliament to form a stable majority government. That is a fact. Now, I want to thank the millions of Australians who have placed their trust in us, in our party, in our policies, in our candidates. I want to thank them for believing in the policies that we brought to this election. And we will continue to deserve that trust and seek to deliver those policies because they are the right ones for our times, because the alternative, my friends, is that we just fall off the back of the pack of leading nations. That is where Labor would have us. That is where Labor would have us. Higher debt, higher deficits, higher taxes. That's their formula. And that's a formula for failure. Now, I want to thank all of my colleagues, all of my parliamentary colleagues, my cabinet. I want to thank Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Leader of the National Party. I want to thank my own Deputy, Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister. Nobody covered more miles than her. The Treasurer and all the other Cabinet Ministers and all of my parliamentary colleagues. I want to thank all of our candidates right across the country. And I want to give a special shout out once again to the extraordinary performance of Julia Banks in Chisholm in Victoria. I want to acknowledge the great work and leadership shown by the Federal Campaign Director, Tony Nutt, and our whole campaign team, and all the Liberal and National Party workers in every electorate, at every polling booth, often having to stand up to intimidation and threats. I want to thank every single one of them. I want to thank my own team, led by Drew Clark and Brad Burke and Sally Cray and David Bowl. Thank them from the team in the Prime Minister's office for the remarkable work they've done over this long campaign. And then, above all, I want to thank Lucy and my family, who, apart from the youngest ones, are here tonight. I want to thank them so much, because as you all know, this political business is a challenging one, and you cannot do it without the love and the commitment and the passion and the loyalty and the support of your family. And I salute you, Lucy, my children, their partners, for all of the love and support you've given me. Now, I want to also address a matter that I know has been raised earlier today or this evening about the calling of the double dissolution election. Let me remind everybody of why that occurred. That was not a political tactic. It was not designed to remove senators or get a new Senate because new senators are better than older senators or whatever. It was simply this. We need to restore the rule of law to the construction industry. At the moment, the CFMEU has over 100 officials before the courts on more than 1,000 charges of breaching industrial law or agreements. There is a culture of thuggery and intimidation and bullying in the construction sector, which John Howard recognised years ago with the Coal Commission and set up the ABCC. Bill Shorten and Julia Gillard abolished it. The Hayden Royal Commission investigated again and made it perfectly clear that the same problems were there, only worse, and we had no choice. Well, we did have a choice. We could have just walked away and said it was all too hard and we weren't committed to our principles of cleaning up the construction industry and ensuring the rule of law applied. We could have done that. I don't think that's consistent with the values and the principles that we share and our party has, or I have. Or the alternative was to take the matter to a double dissolution so that you could present it to a joint sitting. That is the only alternative we had. So those that say we should not have called a double dissolution election are really saying we should have just let the CFMEU get on with doing what they like and never challenge it. And we're not, and that is not in Australia's interest. It's not right. It's weak. We have to stand up for what is right to restore the rule of law in an industry that employs over 1 million Australians. So the hour is late, as I said earlier, and I don't expect us to be waiting till 2 a.m. until the final pre-polls are counted. But as I said, based on the advice I have from our officials and advisors and our strategists within the party, I am confident that we will be able to form a majority government. Now, and certainly, we are the only parties that have the ability or the possibility of doing that. But all will depend on the counting, and we await the completion of that. In the meantime, I want to say to all Australians, those that voted for us, those that voted for other parties or candidates, this is a time when we must come together, when we must stick together. We face enormous challenges. We face challenges in a rapidly evolving global economy that we do not anticipate, that will surprise us. The opportunities will surprise us, but so will the headwinds. We need to have a common purpose. We need to have a commitment to the economic plan that sets us up for success. We have that plan, and we will, in government, be seeking the support of all Australians and all members of the Parliament to the program that alone can deliver us success in the years ahead. Because it is a program, a policy, a plan that is based on what is best in us, that is based on our confidence, on our optimism, on our courage, on our entrepreneurship. The alternative is just one of hiding under the doona and pretending the world is not as it is. It is a form of political escapism that you can only continue for as long as you can keep on running up more and more debt. We've got to stop that. This is a time for clear-eyed assessment of our challenges, our opportunities, and a plan that enables us to meet them. We have that plan. All Australians, we will seek their support, their commitment to support us in government, all of us. We will reach out to unite Australians with that common purpose of ensuring that we can compete, that we can succeed. Because without that, my friends, there is a road to debt, to deficit, to higher taxes, to stagnation. That is what our opponents offered. They offered it under the guise of some scare campaigns so dishonest, but yet in some quarters so effective that they boasted about how skillfully they had lied and how effectively they had deceived. A pretty shameful episode in Australian political history. Well, the election is over, only the counting remains. And now is the time to unite in Australia's aid, in Australia's service, to ensure that we can have truly the very best years for our country ahead of us. Thank you all very much.
That is the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, quite fired up and addressing the Liberal Party faithful at the Wentworth Hotel in Sydney. He says that he's confident that a coalition will be able to form a majority government, but he's been advised by the Australian Electoral Commission that it's going to take until at least Tuesday to count all the postal votes, so we may not have a complete result until then. He talked quite a lot about the Labor Party, and he said that with its Medicare campaign, the Labor Party had mounted one of the most systemic, well-funded lies in the history of Australian politics, and he flagged a possible police investigation over a campaign tactic today where text messages were sent seemingly from Medicare to voters to warn against voting for the coalition. He thanked his cabinet and his family, and he addressed his reasons for calling a double dissolution, saying that the rule of law in the construction industry must be restored. And he finished by talking about some of the serious challenges ahead and said that it was now time to unite in Australia's best interests. Chris Hillman, what did you make of it?
Yeah, and he also talked about the 1998 election, which was essentially, in the end, was the making of John Howard. Just looking at that election result, in fact, the coalitions finished on 86, the ALP on 67 seats in a 148-seat parliament. One Nation took a huge chunk out of the coalition that particular election night, so there are some interesting parallels there. This Prime Minister, I think, emerges bloodied and bruised from this contest and facing a Senate where he'll find it very difficult to get his agenda through. You know, the double dissolution, he addressed that again as an election tactic because he'll have to, because he'll be asked about it endlessly, not just by us, but for people in his party. And, you know, I think that the road ahead for the government, if he says a majority government, well, 76, 77, he's got to get a speaker out of there somewhere, so it's going to be a difficult road ahead.
Annabelle, your final observations for the night?
I thought that speech was fascinating. It was absolutely woven through with subliminal messages to coalition members, voters, people in that room. One of the first things that Malcolm Turnbull did was acknowledge John Howard and then bind himself to John Howard as tightly as possible by referring to John Howard as his mentor and boss and best friend and so on, and then mentioning that John Howard had mentioned to him that this was like 1998. Now that's a message to everybody that this is not the end, it's not a disaster, calm down. He followed that up with, and this is I guess why he waited so late, he's been obviously on pretty much speed dial to the AEC as far as we can tell, that and Barnaby Joyce. And he had a nugget of reassurance, you know, I'm confident that we'll be able to form government. Now, of course, Scott Morrison's been saying that on the ABC all night, but it's probably more reassuring if that's the result you're looking for. No offence, Scott, to hear it from the Prime Minister.
Sorry, Scott. The bloke stayed here till 1 a.m. He gets a smackdown.
Marvellous. Now, the other thing is that he diffused a critique that's already being made. You can feel this critique coming, that it was a mistake to make this a double dissolution election. He preempted that criticism, and I suspect that we'll hear that defence from him a few more times in days to come. Also, why don't we get any more votes counted until Tuesday? I was surprised to hear that.
What is the
I
AEC
don't know.
doing?
Maybe
Anthony,
Anthony, can you hold that thought? I'll come to you. I want to come to you last of all. Just wanted to check, Scott and Penny, would you like to make some final observations this evening?
After you, Penny.
I think that was a speech that was surprisingly defensive and negative. Not the sort of prime ministerial speech you would have anticipated. I thought Malcolm was speaking much more to his party. Bill sought to speak to the country, and it was a speech that was filled with a lot of excuses and a lot of stuff about the Labor Party, but not much positive. Not much that was positive. So I think that probably sums up the night. I think Bill was positive, spoke to the country. Malcolm negative and defensive, he spoke to his party.
Well, not the first time we've disagreed tonight, but look, Malcolm was strong, he was confident, the message was simple, we're going to stick together, we're going to stick to the plan. I think the observations about 1998 I think are very clear. I mean, tonight we've won this election, I believe. We will be able to form a majority government. When you form a majority on the floor of the House with your members in a coalition, then you've won an election and you've won a mandate for what you want to go forward on. And that's where we'll be in a few days' time, and we will get on with it, and we'll get on with it strongly, because that is exactly what the country needs, and that's what we put to the country.
Anthony, can you shed some light on that point about why it would take until Tuesday, and then just give us your final wrap-up and analysis for the night?
The reason why it's been delayed is the results of the 2013 election and lost ballot papers. The Keelty report came up with a series of recommendations that the ballot papers must be secured more clearly. We've seen about a large number of polling places abolished at this election just because of the difficulty of securing them. The ballot papers will all now come back from the returning officers, back from each of the polling places, back to the divisional returning officers. They're then secured, packed up and sent to more secure counting centres, and they want to account for all the ballot papers before they start down the processes of further counting. That is a consequence of there is always a trade-off in elections between a quick count and a secure count, and the results of the last election means there's been more emphasis now put on a secure count. Everything will be organised, and on Tuesday there'll be some new figures tomorrow, mainly special hospitals, some remote booths, some bits and pieces that weren't data entered tonight. But Tuesday's when they'll start most of the details. They've also, no doubt, they'll be concentrating on certain seats, and the parties will have a chance to sort of work out where they're sending all their scrutineers. But I've just had a quick look at the raw numbers in the computer, and once I go to the raw numbers, there's a lot of seats come back. I think the coalition suddenly has 5 more seats in doubt, and there's one party leading, which is not our current model. So it looks, when people look at the numbers tomorrow morning, it will look more in doubt than it is tonight, because we'll be turning off all our predictive tools and they start the process of doing the pre-polls and the like. So these counting will go on for some time. But really, people must understand there's some really close contests here. What they must ensure is that this doesn't end up in the courts trying to determine what's this. So it's the job of the Commission to secure the ballot papers, secure the first preference count, and then they proceed down the track from there.
All right, well, I think on that note, we're going to leave this part of our election coverage.
Oh, no, exactly. Let's just do it.
Will that be 7.5
hours? Out on us now, Sal.
Do we get some sort
There must
of
be a record for this stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a record? 7.5 hours on air.
Yeah, you get a free 6-pack if we make it to 1.
What's that?
Just
Anthony,
that one
sorry.
point also. This is double dissolution.
I've been told,
he's
hang on,
going to keep
the
it
previous
going.
record was 12:45 a.m. for our which is now. One more minute. Sorry, Eric Napper. who's
Double-
in my ear. We're going for one more minute. Anthony.
I'll sing the Up Cronulla song if you like.
I'll sing the Port Proud
This
song.
new Senate,
Anthony,
once
come
the
on.
Senate takes its seat, it's there for 2 years. It can't be
Right.
dissolved. Can't have another half-Senate election for 2 years now, which means if Parliament does become difficult, there's only two options, which is a separate House election or another double dissolution. So you're going to hear a lot more about options.
With that record-breaking
have-
statement.
Yeah, we've broken the record. Suck on that, Kerry O'Brien.
Oh, you
That's
couldn't,
the true
you
rivalry.
couldn't let it go. See,
That's how loose you get at 1 a.m.
let's just wind back from that moment.
He's in
That's been waiting to get out all night.
It's line of the night. It's line of the night.
On that note, Scott Morrison, Penny Wong, you have been absolute troopers. Thank you so much for
No
coming
worries.
and
Thanks for
sharing
having
all
us.
your
Thank you
insights.
for
We
having
really,
us.
really appreciate it. Annabelle, thank you very much, especially for that bus line. That was line of the night. Chris, thank you very much. Anthony, you truly blow my mind. You're just so brilliant. It's just, you do such a great public service. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to all of our ABC team behind the scenes, gigantic and excellent group of people. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you to all of you at home for trusting the ABC to steer you through this most important night for the country. We may not have a final result tonight, but rest assured the ABC will bring you all the developments tomorrow and in the coming days as the count continues and we find out whether the coalition can form majority government or whether we're headed for another hung parliament. Stick with the ABC now. Julia Baird has a special edition of The Drum.